Welcome to part 7 of my far too long collection videos. This is going to be very specifically just the BL titles that I own. These are only BL, so if that's not your thing, feel free to skip this one. If it is your thing, then stick around. And there's not a huge amount of BL titles that I own, but there are some that I really, really love. I am, like with all of my manga purchases, very picky on what I'm buying, and so I think you'll see that reflected in my actual collection here. But first on this shelf we have Ichigenme, the First Class of Civil Law. It's a 2-volume series that was put out by 801, which was, I believe, an imprint of DMP. One of their, I think, more explicit yaoi or BL titles were under that. I'm not entirely sure though. But for long-time watchers of the channel and those who've been watching my previous parts of these collection videos, Fumi Yoshinaga is one of my absolute favorite mangaka. I don't make any secret about it. And so I own all of her titles in English, and that includes the BL. This particular series is out of print, but it is very easy to get. It's very, very, very cheap if you want it. But this is the story of two university students who are in the law course, and they share, or I believe they're in the law course, but they share a seminar together, pretty much. And so the first class is civil law. That they have civil law seminars together. And the whole premise is that these two, after or during the launch party, or like a opening celebration party for this particular seminar class, one of our characters kisses the other, sort of as a, I don't want to say hazing ritual, because that's not really quite what it is, but it is kind of just done as a like heckling thing during this, opening celebration type of sundowner party thing. And so the other character, he's kind of thankful that he only is subjugated to a kiss by this other guy, whereas a lot of the other students are, forced to strip and do all of these things. So he doesn't perceive himself as gay, whilst this other character is, and he admits that to him later on. But once he does realize this other guy's feelings for him and this whole situation, he starts to reflect on his own sexuality, which he never really questioned prior to this. This is definitely a series that's where it's an opposites attract type of deal. You have a quite, I don't want to say uptight, but like straight-laced, very no-nonsense. He wants to do, excel at his schooling and get good grades and everything else. Whereas this other guy, the other half of our main couple, he's a bit more like, I think, a typical uni student. He's just there to have fun and party and spend his time, doing what he wants. And the whole thing is like their particular seminar, their professor there is the easiest grade. So nobody actually tries very hard, aside from our main character. So they have a pretty interesting friendship that then obviously later grows into a more romantic one. It's very good. I like with all of Yoshinaga's titles, I think her character writing is really wonderful. I think there's something genuine and genuinely human about all of her characters. None of her characters are ever like explicitly good or bad people. They're complicated and they make stupid decisions, but they're still trying their hardest to, just kind of exist and get along. But it is a 2-volume series, very easy to get, and pretty good series. Not my favorite of her BL works, but it is definitely worth the read. Another Yoshinaga title, this is Gerard and Jacques, volumes 1 and 2. This one was put out by Blue, which was Tokyopop's previous BL imprint or yaoi imprint. And this series is a 2-volume historical fiction drama about sort of the French high society, some really just very close to the French Revolution, and so a lot of the conflict comes from that. And this one I really, really like, and it's not so much for the relationship aspect of it, because although there is a relationship between Gerard and Jacques, they're never really portrayed as being in love, or, you know, a more typical romance type of story like in a lot of BL. They don't really see each other as like, oh, soulmates or whatever else. This is really about conflict and guilt and losing the people you care about, and also just really intriguing and interesting discussion and conversation on the societal problems and the tensions that were going on within French society at the time, which is really cool. This one is, I think, some BL can be like porn without plot, or just you want to see the erotic sort of stuff and that's all you want from it. But this is kind of the opposite. This is more so the very plot focused, where the explicit BL side of it is very incidental. It's not really, for me, it's not the focus of the series, and not why I would necessarily recommend this one. But again, I find Yoshinaga's characters are really compelling. This is the story of it's been a little while, so forgive me if I can't remember exactly, but it's obviously the relationship between two men, Gerard and Jacques, one who is significantly older than the other, but who's kind of seen as a flirt and like a ladies' man, and kind of just sleeps around with everyone. And the younger one is just kind of caught in his web, and slowly learns more about this other man over time as he gets more involved with his life, and as he's kind of being impressed on more as as one of this guy's lovers. It's interesting. It's an interesting little series. Again, one that you can get for very, very cheap. I think all of Yoshinaga's titles, BL titles, I must clarify, are very easy to find, very cheap, although all of them are technically out of print. So yeah, I do recommend you, if you like historical fiction and historical drama type stories, and you don't mind a necessarily, I don't want to say twisted relationship, because that's not quite what it is, but it's not really it's not a romance you really necessarily want to get behind, and like you want them to succeed, because they're not necessarily that involved or invested in it either. It's a really interesting dynamic that I don't see, or I don't think you see in BL very often. So yeah, check it out. Next is Truly Kindly, which is a collection of one-shots. There's some pretty interesting one-shots in this particular volume. I like with all one-shot collections or single chapter collections, I find the variation of quality can be very hit or miss, but this one, it has some really interesting psychological aspects of the dark side of attachment, if that makes sense. It's really, really good. Another series or another book that was put out by Blue, and this one I think is the only one of Yoshinaga's titles that is kind of harder to find, which is why my copy is a little bit beat up, because for me the options are limited to finding a copy that for a relatively decent price that ships to Australia. But yeah, this is a collection of different single chapter stories. The title story here, Truly Kindly, is pretty interesting. It kind of has a stalking element, or like a extremely possessive element to it, which is shown as like not being a good thing necessarily. So yeah, maybe warning for that. But I really like how interesting Yoshinaga actually plays with a lot of BL and what you expect from BL, especially for the period that this was coming out. I think it has a lot more depth than what a lot of titles were doing, which was mainly trying to just satisfy readers' want for just blatant pornography. Yoshinaga does kind of she definitely plays around with expectations a lot, and I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff with this particular volume. And there's some stories I really love in this one, so if you can hunt a copy down, then I would definitely recommend it. Next is Lovers in the Night, which is another single volume. This is just a self-contained volume, but Truly Kindly actually has the first chapter introducing these characters. And this is another series set in historical France. I think that's a setting that Yoshinaga really enjoys writing about. Aside from her original work, she's also done doujin for Rose of Versailles, so that makes sense. But this is about a young master, head of the household type deal, and his butler and their sordid love affair. Again, really interesting, really good. I love how even dynamics that I don't tend to enjoy in like my romance, like, you know, but like master servant or master butler relationships, student teacher relationships is a big one I dislike. A lot of things I dislike, Yoshinaga's able to write them pretty well, and in a way that I think is done with the context that makes it easier to read, because it's not necessarily saying that it's a good thing, which is always a good thing for me. But yeah, so Yoshinaga's Lovers in the Night, this is another blue one, another one. This one is easier to find compared to Truly Kindly, and it is probably a little bit easier to read because it's one complete story about these two characters. And again, if you like historical fiction, historical drama, historical romance, then check this one out. It is worth looking around for, and I'm pretty sure most of these titles you can get for like new for like very few dollars, like $1 or $2, things like that. I'm pretty sure Right Stuff usually has it in their holiday sale, so maybe check that out as an option if you are wanting to read this for yourself. Next, we start on the Koyonara titles, which is another one of my absolute favorite BL mangaka. This is Nights or Night-S, a single volume collection of short stories. This one is put out by Sublime, so it is very easy to get this one. It also, if you don't know, it does have a kind of a additional side chapter type of deal, which is digital only, but you can buy it from their website or through Kindle or whatever. That is good as well. So if you've read this, if you like Yonada's work, but you didn't know about that, then maybe invest the 99 cents or whatever it is to read it. It's really good. So this is, if you don't know Ko Yonada's work, I think she's most definitely known for her darker emotional drama type stories. A lot of her manga focused around the Yakuza, and this one is no different. It is a collection of different stories, again, like with Truly Kindly, but there's definitely Yakuza stories in here. This is another creator where I really like how she writes the emotions and the relationship of the non-physical relationship of the characters that she's writing about. It makes it a lot more intriguing for me to read, and I do get more invested in the entire situation. I feel like her stories aren't just, even in the one shots, her stories don't feel like just, or her settings don't feel just props to lead to erotic content, which you do see later in her other series as well. That's not to say that her works aren't explicit. They definitely are, and they're very satisfying in that sense as well. But I find just there's a lot of compelling moments to her settings and to the character dynamics that isn't purely like a physical attraction or like a lust aspect. It's really good. And this one is definitely the easiest of her works to get because of course it's by Sublime, compared to all of her other series, which are unfortunately kind of always in and out of print. You can get them digitally, which if you don't have the opportunity to, or you just can't afford to buy the incredibly out of print titles that Juné puts out, then I would encourage you to do that. People complain about Dark Horse not keeping their stuff in print, but man, I don't think there's any publisher worse than Juné. Seriously, honestly. But yeah, Nights is really great, and I think it's a good introduction to Yonoda's work as well. So it's kind of good that this one is easier to get, but it is sad that like her other stuff is so hard to get. And speaking of hard to get Yonoda titles, this is Twittering Birds Never Fly. I have the 3 volumes that have been released in English by Juné. They just recently, like last month, said they were reprinting these 3 volumes. I'm pretty sure that's happened, and I'm pretty sure they're out of print again. So I don't know if people were able to buy a copy when that happened, but if you are wanting to not miss out, because I do think this is definitely one of their more popular, like most popular titles that they have, that they kind of still cling on to the license for, unfortunately, because we are very behind on the English releases, and I doubt we'll see more. Who knows? Hopefully, maybe one day, fingers crossed, we might get volume 4, 5, 6 and the rest of it. But I think it's either going to have to be through, and people don't trust Juné for their Kickstarters anymore, understandably, because their current one is just a shambles. DMP is not doing well. And then the other thing is that, so I don't know if they could do a Kickstarter successfully. It might, because it is such a popular series, but people don't trust them anymore. The only other option I think is someone like License Rescues the series, which would be phenomenal and I would absolutely support. Or somehow, through some miracle, they decide to actually, clean up their act and actually start putting books out again, which would be nice, and hopefully paying the people who work for them as well, which would be even nicer. So this is Twittering Birds Never Fly, one of my absolute favorite BL of all time. It is very dark. It does have a lot of aspects of, obviously, Yakuza culture, but so if you don't know the story, this is about a fairly high up officer within the Yakuza, but he's very he's kind of feared, but also nobody respects him because he's just a full-blown slut nympho, loves having sex, and sleeps around with anyone and everyone, and that's kind of his reputation. So again, people don't respect him, but he's very good at his job as well. So he is very high up and in the rankings, as it were, or the ranks, not rankings. Well, I'm sure he's high up in the rankings of opinion amongst the men. But so he's just like very into sleeping around and getting dicked as much as he can, as much as humanly possible. But he gets a new member of his group, who kind of becomes his bodyguard, who is kind of the one person that he allows to get close to him, because he's the one person who he feels he'll never be able to sleep with, because that other guy has erectile dysfunction and cannot physically get it up, as it were. And that was due to trauma. He previously was a police officer, but after killing his sister's rapist, he was sent to prison. And so now he's obviously out of the police force and doesn't really have anywhere to go. And he was absolutely bewitched by this young Yakuza guy. And so he decided to join purely for his love and adoration and respect for this guy whom really nobody else has much love or adoration or respect for. So it's their dynamic, their relationship, and oh, it's so good. It's so good. This has a film upcoming, which is really exciting. I am looking forward to it. The trailers look very, very, very good. It will definitely not be nearly as explicit as the mangas, because, I mean, it might, but I don't know, guys. Like, that would be a lot, because this is a very, very, very explicit manga. But it all serves a purpose to the story, which is also really wonderful. Like with a lot of Yakuza stories, or Yakuza BL, it does have a lot of elements that are darker and are, I guess, hard to watch and hard to read about. Most notably later in the series, or well, throughout the series, we learn about our characters. I mean, rape obviously is I've already mentioned, but there's sexual assault and prostitution, and a lot of these aspects, like various abuses that are in the series and are shown and are used as explanation for these characters' personalities and their current choices and positions and things like that. And none of it is like romanticized, which is generally my problem with those aspects in older BL typically. But it is in there, so if you're not wanting to read about that, then maybe avoid this series. But it is so good, guys. It is so good. And it is a shame that out of all the publishers, Juné is the one, quote unquote, releasing this, because they haven't released a new volume in years, literally years, probably 5 years. So it sucks. But as I said, the first 3 volumes did get a reprint recently. It is still available via digital means from Juné as well. I won't say, necessarily support Juné, because they've definitely burned a lot of bridges and broken a lot of respect and trust that customers have had over the last couple years. But I do hope we see the rest of the series, or what's current to the series in some way, shape, or form in English, because I adore this series and it's a travesty that it's not available in English. Next, for Koyonoda's titles, we have No Touching at All. This is a single volume office romance about a guy who, on his first day at work, is kind of cornered by a belligerent drunk in the elevator who turns out to be his boss, and who's kind of like very prickly and doesn't get along with many people at the office. He's kind of a hard ass. But it's their relationship and their romance growing from that. This is not my favorite of her titles. I think it's fairly standard for this setting. It is still good. It is still worth the read. But the next title, which is kind of a spin-off of this title, is much better, and it is my preferred of the two. It's fairly typical. If you like office romances with, not necessarily an opposites attract type of setting or deal, or dynamic, but it does, like, these two do have their problems that they need to overcome, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff about being outed at work and being overtly, out at work, things like that, which is really, good thing to see in this type of manga, and I think it is something that, for the setting, kind of gets brushed over a little bit for some other mangaka, but this isn't a perfect series. This isn't, as I said, even my favorite of her series, but it is still worth reading. Although, again, one that is very out of print, incredibly hard to find, and I think, again, it did get a reprint either through Kickstarters or just through various means, because Yonda stuff, as I said, is definitely their most popular works currently that they have licensed, but it is still available, and you can get it digitally pretty much anywhere, so there's that option as well. Next is Even So I Will Love You Tenderly. This is another single volume, and as I mentioned just a minute ago, this is actually a spin-off of No Touching at All, which is, this one is the better title of the two, I think. I know some people weren't super impressed with No Touching at All, and so they just weren't really invested in reading this one. It's way better, and I really like these characters. So this is the basic premise is that we have two characters who have been friends for many years. One of them who is a closeted gay man, and then the other who perceives himself as straight. And so the gay man has never told his friend that he is gay, but he's been in love with him for as long as he can remember. So he's been harboring these feelings for a man who he kind of considers one of his closest friends, but he doesn't want to confess his feelings because he thinks he's straight, and so he doesn't want to ruin their friendship over that. And it's definitely that kind of self-sacrificing. If I'm close to them, that's all I need. I don't need to be in a relationship type of deal. And it's just handled really, really well. But so later, our straight character, quote unquote, starts to question his sexuality after one of his co-workers, or a couple of his co-workers, i.e. the couple in No Touching at All, get together. He has feelings for one of those characters. He starts to question his own sexuality, which brings up a lot of conflict to his friend, because he realizes that this other man is kind of wondering about his capacity to be sexually and romantically attracted to a man who isn't him. And so there's his question as to whether or not he should be finally confess his feelings and tell him what he's been thinking and all of his love for him, or if he should just, again, kind of let things be. He doesn't want to ruin their friendship that's been 5 or 10 years long at this point. But it's real, and so it's that, and it's their relationship after that. It's really, really good. I think there's a real empathy and a real genuine connection to the struggle that our gay character is going through, and his want to not break ties with this man who he's come to care about so much, and his struggles with, because although he does love this other man, because he doesn't think that it's ever going to go anywhere, he has this series of just kind of casual hookups, and so his trying to balance the need to sate his sexual side, but then also having unrequited love for his friend. It's really good. It's really, really good. I think there's a lot of complexity to how Yoneda writes these characters that, again, isn't really reflected in No Touching at All. And this one, another one that I think is out of print, pretty sure it's out of print. Yoneda's titles always get out of print as soon as Juné releases them or releases a reprint of them, because they do like a batch of 100 and that goes so quickly. I don't know what their reprint numbers are, but it has to be low because it always almost immediately goes out of print again as soon as it's licensed or announced that they're doing a reprint. But another one you can get digitally, and one that I do recommend more so than the original. Although the original is a good companion piece, you might want to read it as well. They're both really good. I'm really lucky that I do own the entirety of Juné's Yoneda releases, but if someone else were to relicense and republish this, then I wouldn't be complaining, because I do think that Yoneda's work deserves to be read by more people, especially because we have a lot of very, very good BL coming out currently, but they tend to lean towards the non-explicit side, which is fine, which is wonderful, and makes it very easy to recommend to people sort of new to the genre. But if you are wanting something satisfyingly erotic, or like with that sexual element to it, but also want the more complex emotional part of it, Yoneda is like perfect for that. Oh my god, her manga is so sexy. But yeah, so Even So I Will Love You Tenderly is wonderful, and I encourage you to read it in a legal means, and probably that means digital titles for most people nowadays if you're wanting to hunt it down. Next is another long out of print, somewhat reprinted via Kickstarter title from Juné, but this one very thankfully, very happily, is getting a reprint, I think this month, maybe in a couple months, from Sublime. They relicensed this and they're putting out an omnibus release, but this is 7 days, Monday to Thursday, and then Friday to Sunday is the second volume, but the Sublime release is just Monday to Sunday. And this is by Venio Tachibana and Rihito Takarai. You probably know Takarai thanks to 10 Count, which is a series I don't really like very much, but is definitely her most popular work. She does have a non-BL title, Granulaires, which is pretty interesting, kind of a low fantasy type setting with a nature element to it. But this for many, many years was my go-to kind of introductory BL title for people, but it was hard to recommend because it has also been out of print for years and incredibly hard to find in print. So I'm really happy that really happy that Viz decided to relicense this and is putting it out in its entirety through an omnibus as well. It does make it easier to read, I think, if you just get the whole thing just at once. But this is a story of two high school boys, one who is in his third year, and then the other is the year under. It might be second year and the first year. It doesn't matter. The younger one, he's kind of built a reputation at school where he will date the first person who asks him in the week, he will date them for a week and give them a week to kind of convince him to fall in love with them. And if he hasn't fallen in love with them at the end of the week, then he'll break up with them. And it's kind of a no hard feelings type of scenario. Pretty much every girl in the school has asked him out at this point. They're doing it not with the expectation that he's going to fall in love with them necessarily, but he's a really good, attentive boyfriend to them, and they really enjoy the time that they spend with him. So when he hasn't fallen in love with them at the end of the week, there's, as I said, no hard feelings. Nobody kind of gossips about him or anything like that. But he kind of plays the perfect boyfriend for all of these girls. And it's kind of an experience that even if they aren't necessarily interested in him, although many of them are, because he's quite, good-looking young guy who's very kind to everyone and sweet and, all of these things. So they do it just as like, well, I've done it. I'm happy to say that, like, I dated so-and-so. It's kind of a rite of passage for many of the girls at the school. And, of all the years, like the third years, that every girl from like every grade has dated this guy. Anyway, so our main character, he kind of runs into this younger guy whilst he's waiting out I think he's waiting for a pizza delivery, like a lunch delivery outside the school gates, and he runs into him on a Monday. And this guy is just coming to school. He's just gotten to school, and so he hasn't had anyone ask him to date him yet. So this guy's like, oh yeah, you're so and so. It must be a lot of hard work. And I guess someone's just like waiting to date you, or like, because again, it's like first come, first serve. So if you get in there, then he won't say no. He'll just like be like, oh, okay. And he said, well, you do this every week. I'm sure you need a break because, all the girls say you're sort of the best boyfriend, but I'm sure that must be pretty taxing on you. So he offers like, well, how about you date me this week? So you can just kind of relax and hang out and like chill. I'm not expecting you to fall in love with me. You're not expecting me to fall in love with you. It's fine. We'll be friends and, we'll do whatever. But you don't have to be like Mr. Prince Charming. And so you can just kind of recharge. And so that's how their kind of fake dating starts. But if you know anything about fanfic tropes, the fake dating always leads to real feelings. And that's what happens here. So there's a kind of a conflict between these two characters because they start to realize that they genuinely do love each other or are feeling, romantically interested with each other, but they feel like the other one thinks of the relationship as, a fake relationship, which it started as. And so they think that the whole relationship has a time limit of 1 week. So there's just drama and they're trying to get closer, but also not get too close because they feel like when they inevitably split up at the end of the week that it's going to hurt too much. And oh, it's so good. This one is very sweet. It does have that kind of that tropey like fake dating to real dating trope. And it is also not explicit whatsoever. I think they maybe kiss once or twice. So this is like really, really good intro if you're not super keen on reading like just full on explicit smut. And you are just wanting to see what is available with BL. There's other titles now that are also of this that I would say are probably better than this one, but this one is kind of a classic, and I am really happy that it is available, and it's still really good. It's still really, really good. It's still worth the read, and if you don't have these Juné releases, then I 100% recommend the upcoming Sublime Omnibus release. And also I'm probably going to be buying that one as well, because I want to see how the translation is, because that's the other thing about Juné releases is their translations can be a little bit iffy. So I want to compare the pair. Next is another very out of print, unfortunately, release from Juné, but this is Junko's Mr. Mini-Mart. Junko is one of my absolute favorite BL mangaka, and I love her comedy. I think she balances the more serious elements and her comedy really, really well. You may be familiar with her non-BL work, Kiss Him Not Me, which is also a really great sort of rom-com type deal. And this is so good. We don't have a lot of Junko available in English. It's just this one and the next one. And this is by far the better of the two. A lot of her other stuff is not available in English legally, unfortunately, but I would absolutely buy anything that any publisher wanted to put out of hers because she is wonderful. But this is the story of two teenagers who work at a convenience store or mini-mart, aka the title. One of them who's kind of he was seen as sort of a bad boy. He's got dyed hair, he's got piercings, he's had a string of girlfriends, whatever. But deep down he's a pretty genuine and kind guy who's just, he's just being a teenager. And then we have our main character who is very quiet, very reserved, and he withdrew from school. He was being very viciously bullied after being outed at school, and so he kind of became a shut-in for a long time. And after many, many months of just being kind of secluded to his room, he was offered a job at this mini-mart by a family friend in order to kind of reintroduce him and kind of bring him back into society and become more comfortable with interacting with people and become more happy with himself and his situation, and to get on, move on past that trauma and get to a better place. So he works at this mini-mart, and he works with this other guy who, as I said, is kind of a bad boy. And at first they don't really get along. They're very different personalities. And of course, our main character has a lot of fear of being, bullied again and ridiculed and possibly attacked and hurt for his sexuality. So he's quite standoffish. He doesn't want to get close to anyone. But over the course of their, sharing shifts and working together, they grow closer, they learn more about each other, and our main character starts to have feelings for this other boy, but he doesn't want to admit it because the last boy that he had feelings for was the one who kind of outed him and started the bullying. And oh, it's so good. This is such a sweet little book. It does have some, spicy, explicit parts to it later on at the end of the book. So you're getting both. I really like how, in particular, our main character, his whole arc, going through his trauma and getting over the people who have hurt him in the past, and also kind of the redemption and the karma that comes back around on that whole situation. It's really, really good. Also, it's a pretty interesting and a refreshing element that they actually talk about. Well, not so much. It's not like they sit down and go through every dot point or whatever, but they actually talk about, as teenagers and as being in a gay relationship, it's like this intimate side is different than it is in a heterosexual couple. And so how you prepare for that, and how, what you need to have an enjoyable sexual experience with your partner when, things aren't the same. It's very, very good, and it's kind of refreshing to see that element be so upfront and done with levity, but also comedy. It's not super duper serious, but you realize that it's an important aspect that you don't see ever in BL at all. You do see it sometimes, but it's very rarely talked about, and I think that it lends a lot to our other character and his giving some insight into how much he cares about this boy and not wanting to hurt him and being a conscientious partner. And it's so good. It's really sweet. Again, one that is really super duper out of print, which is really unfortunate. It does get reprints every so often, so again, sign up to Juné's newsletter if you're really desperate and you're wanting to jump in on the next time it gets a reprint. Either that or pray to the BL gods that be that somebody relicenses it, because it deserves to be read. And it is, again, like all of Juné's titles, available digitally, I'm pretty sure. So you can still read it, but maybe not have it on your shelves as such. Next is the other Junko title that we have, another Juné release though, and this is Return of the Prince. This is a collection of 3 one-shot stories that are all separate. So this one it's really, really good. It's still really, really good. I will say that Return of the Prince is about cousins, so if that, beware about that. But the other 2 stories are really, really, really good, and I don't think you should necessarily skip it, just because the main, or the first story is that trope, because I'm not into that, but it's still it's handled well. It's not perfect, but I like enough of the other stories I like the other 2 stories enough that it's not that, I don't really care. But Return of the Prince is about 2 cousins who kind of reconnect at a wedding that they're both attending, obviously family wedding. They're not they're not first cousins or anything. They're kind of different, separate cousins, but they haven't seen each other since they were kids. And the younger one, when they were kids, he was kind of the fat kid, very shy, and constantly kind of picked on by everyone else. And the older cousin, looked after him. Now it's been 20 years or whatever, and the older cousin is kind of at a point in his life where he's just done with everything. He's single and he just doesn't have much going on. And I think it's his sister who's getting married. So there's the whole pressure of oh, well, your sister and this. And he's just I'm just so over it. And then he reconnects, where he runs into the cousin that he knows and knew as a child. And he got hot and successful, and so he's kind of everything that this other the older cousin wishes he could be. And it's and then so the younger cousin confesses his feelings. I always loved you, and you were my greatest inspiration, and blah blah blah, typical to this scenario. And so there's a bit of conflict in so far as but I'm not gay type of deal. But ultimately it's them getting together and kind of, just seeing the good in each other and the parallels of their childhood versus current, and how things have changed, but also how things have stayed the same. It's decent for this type of setup, and although I'm not a huge fan of it, it is still pretty good. The other 2 stories are better. One is about both stories are about high school kids. The second one, the first high school kid one, is about two kids who don't really know each other, but slowly grow a friendship sort of through circumstance and coincidence. They slowly get closer and closer, and all of that good stuff. It's really good. But the guy, one of the students, is kind of spacey and a lot of people don't really interact with him because he's just kind of weird, and so there is an interesting dynamic there. And then the third story, the last story, is the last main story, because there's an extra little story at the end, but it's not, it's fine. The third story is a love triangle between three childhood friends. One who is in love with one friend, but that friend has a girlfriend, and then the third friend is in love with the friend that's... Oh my goodness, guys. Oh, my trashy heart loves it. It is really good, and I'm just a sucker for childhood friends. I'm not, I don't necessarily like love triangles or anything, but childhood friends and then unrequited love to requited love are such my thing that I'm like, oh yes. And again, Junko manages to balance kind of the humor and the quite emotional elements of it with a lot of grace. She does it very, very well, and I think her balance is just perfect for a lot of her types of stories. So she's able to make you laugh, but then also able to hurt your heart and make you cry. And it's Return of the Prince. It's a solid little book. It is, again, one that I think is incredibly out of print, unfortunately, but again, you can buy digitally. Yeah, I hope we see more Junko in English, because she has other titles that are, in my opinion, more solid, and also I think just generally more cohesive. And I wish I just wish we had more of her work in English, more of her BL work, because we have her non-BL work, but I wish we saw more of her BL work, because she's a great mangaka, and yeah, I want to own more of her work. Next is another 2-volume series. This is Only Serious About You by Asao Kai. This one, again, really out of print. I'm pretty sure volume 1 is impossible to find. It took me years to track down a copy of volume 1, and I was super duper lucky to do so. But oh man, this series is kind of tropey, but I am weak for parenting. In BL manga, and this manga has it. So this is a story about a single dad who, after the death of his wife, is trying to, trying to make ends meet. He has a little girl who goes to kindergarten, or she goes to school, but he works at a restaurant, well, like a ramen type style restaurant, and he's just kind of struggling, trying to just do what it takes to give his daughter the best life he can, but obviously his job doesn't pay a huge amount, and having lost his wife a couple years before, he hasn't really moved past that grief either. But at the restaurant where he's working, there's a regular customer who is kind of also a friend of the owner. They've known each other for a long time, but they're the type of friends that, you're with them and you stick around, but you don't necessarily approve of their lives. So the owner does not approve of his friend. His friend is a pretty successful businessman. He's got a lot going on in his life. He's doing well, but every time he goes to this restaurant to eat, it's with a different guy. He always has a different boyfriend, and none of his relationships seem to last. He's a huge flirt, and he starts to flirt with this other guy, the single dad, who is just started working there. I will mention, because I don't remember if I don't think this is a second job. I think he had lost his job or something. I can't remember. It's been a while. And the single dad's like not interested. He doesn't see himself as gay, or doesn't think he's gay, and then, or bisexual as it were. And then also he's just like not into the type of like playboy personality. He's just like, you're just a bad guy. You're gonna get stabbed for all of the, you know, hearts you've broken, or all the sleeping around you do, or whatever. But thanks to some issues with either rent going up or something, this guy, he offers to, you know, be roommates with this single dad who has kind of found himself without an apartment, without somewhere to live with his daughter. So this other guy is like, well, I have spare rooms. I have a really large apartment. Nobody's living there but me. And I can't really, you don't have to pay rent or anything. It's fine. So how about you live with me? And he's doing it obviously because he's interested in this guy. So there's like motives to it. But at the same time, like he does genuinely want to help him. And so he takes him up on the offer and says like, okay, like I'm just going to stay with you until I can find my own place, until I can, you know, whatever. But very quickly their relationship, you know, grows and becomes something more, and his daughter as well gets like quite attached to this other man, and it's dang good. It's dang good. I will say that the like sexual elements of it, the explicit elements are pretty cliche type of BL dynamic or yaoi dynamic, but they're not like the worst thing ever. And it's not like there's so much good to it, although again there's some issues of like nothing is non-consensual per se, but they can be a little bit dubious as for consent. But you know, it's BL of a certain age, and there's some things that you have to go, well, is this really part of the story? Is this kind of the trope of expectation for this type of story? But it is very good, and it's very sweet, and the daughter is really cute, and I do think there's a lot of good to it. It is one that is quite popular, and again, one that is very unfortunately out of print. I don't know if this one has a digital release, to be honest. It probably does, and if it does, then I do think it's worth reading, especially if you like manga with cute kids and parenting elements for it, or BL with parenting elements to it, which I really, really do. So, you know, yeah, there's that. Next is Classmates, the 3-volume series, or 1 volume / 2 volumes with graduates, by Asumiko Nakamura. One of the best BL series, just kind of full stop. The film is phenomenal, and still, in my opinion, the best BL anime that is out, although that has quickly been changing because we are getting more and more very good anime adaptations of BL works. I adore this series. I used to own, or I guess I technically do still own, the digital releases for Classmates that Juné put out many a year ago, which are terrible as well. I do not recommend. This new release by 7 Seas is amazing. I'm really happy that we're seeing Nakamura's BL in English, and of course, more specifically this title, because these characters are great. And I hope we see more of the like spin-off series and sequel series, and because I love it so much. I do actually have all 3 volumes, but the 3rd volume is in the other room because I have it separated for my pickups video at the end of the month. But this is a 3-volume, the main series is a 3-volume series about 2 high school classmates who don't really know each other. One's very quiet and studious, the other one is a musician, kind of very personable and friendly. But one day, the musician notices that the quiet one isn't singing along with the rest of the class during choir practice, and he's like, oh, he's probably stuck up. He thinks he's too good for everyone and doesn't have to do any of this. But he soon later, that same day or the next day or whatever, notices that same kid is in the classroom practicing the song, and the reason he was just mouthing the words was because he wasn't confident enough in his singing to join in, pretty much. And so he offers to teach him how to sing. As a musician, like, he can read the music and he has a fairly good understanding of how notes should be sung and all of that. And so they start spending more and more time together. And as things do, their feelings grow and change. And so, yeah, it's really wonderful. And eventually they do start to date more seriously. And the really great thing about the classmates and then sort of the larger, I guess, franchise almost of this series that Nakamura has made is that you do follow these characters for a long time. These 3 volumes cover the rest of their final year of high school, and then also brings in this element of how their relationship will change or stay the same after graduation, after they are living in 2 separate cities, and, will things work out? Does long distance work out? Which is what, like, the sequels and the spin-offs deal with, is like when they're adults and college students and things like that, which is why I want to see them, because I think there's something really wonderful about being able to watch characters grow over an extended period of time, and how the shifting points in people's lives impact their decisions and impact how they interact with the other people in their lives. It's so good. It's so good, guys. Classmates, I think, is definitely, nowadays, this and the next series I'm talking about are kind of my go-to recommendations for if you're wanting to try BL, but you're not quite sure, you're not wanting to jump into something super explicit. As I said, it's really easy to recommend because it is such an incredibly high quality work, and I love it. It's very, very, very good, and the relationship between our 2 main characters is wonderful. I will mention that there's kind of a creepy teacher character here who is interested in one of our teenage characters, but he's aware that that's a really creepy thing. It doesn't necessarily stop him from being interested, but he doesn't necessarily ever. It's if you don't like that aspect, then I can totally understand. It is such a small part to the story, and it's generally used as a motivation to kick our main characters into gear, into communicating with each other or reacting to something. It's an element that's so prolific in BL, somewhat unfortunately, because I think there are things that I feel aren't necessarily good. The idea of an adult role model who has been in or would be interested in a relationship with a teenager, especially in this case where it's a student and a teacher. But I think I've said this before with other manga, most notably That Blue Sky Feeling, where I think it is so prolific because in Japan the community is much smaller, and I think it's not an uncommon thing to happen where you kind of just attach yourself to every queer person that you know, because it isn't like people aren't as open about their sexuality or as accepting of their sexuality or other people's sexuality as they are in the West, generally speaking. So when people do find other individuals within the queer community, they kind of attach to each other a lot more than they would regardless of the appropriateness of that relationship. So it is, I think it's a symptom of the whole culture and of Japan, and still the perception of queer individuals in Japan. So it's not something I'm not into it, but it is something that I think is so prolific in books, even like really, really good books like this that are otherwise very unproblematic, because it is kind of just a general thing that does actually go on. I am also not speaking of any from experience, so if I'm incorrect and you are more informed, then please inform me, but I do think that is one of the major explanations for it. It's not an excuse for it, but I do think it's a major explanation, and the Western perspective of that whole dynamic is different, especially when it comes to media. So, yeah. Read Classmates. It's very, very good, and I hope that if it is selling well, it is, I'm pretty sure it is selling very well for 7 Seas. It will encourage them to license more of Nakamura's titles, and more specifically, titles with these two characters. Next is the 4 volumes of I Hear the Sunspot by Yuki Fumino. This is a ongoing series. Technically, I say 4 volumes, but they're all like separate. So there's I Hear the Sunspot, I Hear the Sunspot Theory of Happiness, and then Limit, which is a ongoing series. So it's got 2 volumes currently. The 3rd volume is out in Japan, I believe. I don't remember. But this is the story of 2 college students who, one is, he's constantly working. He's very energetic and loud, and works very, very, very hard, but doesn't have a huge amount of money. Despite this, all of his money goes to his grandpa and sort of their, because it's just the 2 of them, so he's really the only one bringing in any kind of income for them. But he's also he's a loud, very personable young guy, kind of brash, and he's also like a bottomless pit when it comes to food. He's constantly hungry. But one day he's kind of out bemoaning the fact that he is starving. He was working all night and all day and whatever else, doesn't have any money for lunch, and he runs into another student who offers him his lunch, and in exchange for his help, because this other student is hard of hearing. He has ongoing hearing loss, so the older he gets, it's presumed the worse his hearing will get, and he has a lot of difficulties getting, listening to lectures and getting notes and that. So he asks him, like, will you take notes for me in this class that we share? And in exchange, I will pay you in food. And this guy thinks it's just the best deal ever. He's like, absolutely, I'll do that. And so they become very good friends. And for our protagonist, who does have hearing loss or deafness, he wasn't born with it. It's something that developed later on in his life after a sickness. And so he's struggling with the realities that he is actively losing his hearing. And so he tries to be, I guess, normal, blend into a more typical crowd of people, but he does, obviously have issues hearing people a lot of the time. But he notices that he never has a problem hearing what our other protagonist has to say. He can always hear his voice, no matter how noisy the room is, no matter how many other people are talking. He can always hear what he's saying. He doesn't have to, lip read or anything like that. So, this is a very slow burn but sweet romance between these 2 characters. But I really, really love this series for its representation of disability, and most notably like hidden disability and the deaf community as a whole. The longer the series goes on, we are introduced to more deaf characters, so you do get a lot of different perspectives on deafness and different experiences. We have characters who, like our protagonist, are losing their hearing and didn't develop deafness until later on in life. And then we have characters who were born deaf. We have characters who aren't deaf but have deaf family members, and how that plays into their relationship. It's so good. It's so good. There's a lot of discussion on the perception of disabilities in society, and again, as I said, hidden disabilities where you wouldn't necessarily know someone is deaf just by looking at them. There's so many great things about this manga, and it is definitely a slow burn. It's definitely one where sometimes I'm like, just communicate with each other, because miscommunication is, I mean, despite the deafness, is still a large part of this. I think these boys need to sit down and have a talk. But it is really, really, really good. I'm so happy that we're getting this series. It has been very popular for many years via scans and things like that. It's one that I think a lot of people knew about and read and loved and wanted. And the fact that One Piece Books is putting it out now is really, really cool. It's really phenomenal. I'm so happy that we are getting this series in print in English, and it's ongoing. There's still more to enjoy. And aside from the first volume, all of these volumes are really thick, so you get a lot of content as well per book. It's just really lovely. And again, like with Classmates, this one is one of my go-to now for recommendations of starting this genre and getting interested if you're not a typical BL reader, if you don't really know much about the genre and you're curious about it. Check this one out. Next is Age Called Blue. This is a Net Comics release, and is written by S.Dem, a very well-known BL mangaka. Love their work. But this is a story of two guys who are in a band with other people, and they have dreams of becoming successful rock stars and whatever else. But one of these guys steals the other guy's guitar and sells it to pay off a debt, and that kind of breaks their friendship down, but also introduces this romantic or sexual thing that they weren't willing to admit prior. And then we also have the other members of the band who want to kick out the guy who stole the guitar, understandably. And so the conflict of that, as our main characters, their relationships are changing. So S.Dem stuff is really interesting. It's got a real moodiness to it and almost a melancholy to it that is really poignant. And in all of her works, there's something that just resonates as really genuine when it comes to the conflict and of the imperfection of human relationships and interacting with other people. Oh, yeah, if you like moody types of BL, then S.Dem is kind of my go-to. This and the next one. I think this is out of print. I don't remember. It's not easy to find. And the other one is really, really hard to find. I think the only one you can find very readily is the next series that I'm going to be talking about. But if you can track down a copy of this, I would recommend it. It's very good, and I think that S.Dem, it's kind of a shame that we don't have a lot of her BL available anymore, considering how beloved she is. A lot of her titles that were released kind of in the past, before the whole market crash and all of that, so they're not readily available for most people anymore. and that's a shame. I do hope that we see more of her works available over time, whether they be relicenses or just other things that never got a print release in English. So yeah, I was pretty happy that I was able to find this one. I think I found it on eBay for quite cheap. I can't remember. It's been many a year. But yeah, it's a really decent kind of personal drama conflict. Obviously, music is involved as well. And Estem manages to balance all of her characters and her story just perfectly. Just really, really perfectly. Next is Tableau numero 20 by Estem. This is a collection of very short stories by this creator, and oh man, it is really good. The title story is, I think, the longest story, and it actually has 2 chapters in this particular book, but it is what I would assume based off of the Pygmalion story about and this is about a art restorer who, throughout the course of restoring one of the great works by his favorite painting and favorite painter, he spent his life studying this painting and has fallen in love with the figure within it. And whilst he has the opportunity to restore it, one day the figure within the painting disappears, and he has come out from the painting and now exists. And so our art restorer is able to interact with this painted figure, this individual who was being painted at the time. Again, Pygmalion myth or story, whatever. Very well known. It's been adapted and used in so many various ways over the years. This is no exception. Really, really, really good. I think, like with, I kind of compare Estem a lot with Natsume Ono, not because of the old man aspect, but because of the interest in Europe. And I'd say for Estem there's a lot of interest in her works of like Latin America, Spain, Italy. Like there's a lot that she writes about that's centered around that, comparatively to like Natsume Ono, who writes a lot about Italy. Just so much about Italy. So we have our main story, which obviously is the art restorer and our painted man, and their relationship, and kind of the bizarre reality of being able to interact with a figure who you've been loving from afar for so long, and in a capacity that you never expected to be realized, because there's literally like an object, like a painting. There's not much you can gain from, falling in love with a painted figure. Anyway, but it's really, really good. The second story is a pretty interesting one about just kind of friends and horse racing and making bets and wishes and things like that. The third and fourth story are set in, I think, Spain. Well, the first one's set in Spain or Latin America somewhere. I haven't read it in a little while, but it's about a musician or a dancer who kind of performs at a specific restaurant, and then one of the patrons is being entranced by his music and the way he dances, and then some conflict that arises from other musicians in the area. And then the fourth story is is kind of heartbreaking. It, again, a lot of, if not all of Estem's stories are fairly moody and very, they've got a certain atmosphere to them, so none of them are necessarily genuinely happy or like hopeful. That's not the right word, but even the happy stories have this underlying melancholy to them. But the fourth series, or the fourth story in this book, is just kind of heartbreaking, but also heartwarming. It's about two individuals who meet pretty much on a regular basis on a park bench. One of them is a much older man. The other one is a young guy who works in the area, and he kind of notices that this older man sits on this bench all of the time. And so they start talking, and they start the younger guy starts complaining or like talking about his problems with his boyfriend and how they're always fighting, or, different things, how he's worried about, not finding someone who loves him and blah, blah, blah. And then this older guy, he says that he's waiting for someone, and he's talking about, his love that got away, and how they met on a park bench like this, and then they were so in love, but then they grew apart, and they both got married to women and just like did their own thing. And then you find out later like some other stuff that's happened since then, and the reality of the situation, and why this guy continues to wait on this park bench for the true love of his life, trying to re-meet with him. It's really good, but kind of sad as well. Wonderful, wonderful book. Again, like with the other one, this one is much easier to get because it's a Sublime book, and I'm pretty sure it's still in print. Highly recommended. All of the stories are really, really good. I do say a lot of the time that with all of these kind of collected one-shot chapters, you're always going to get a variation in quality, but I find that SDEM stuff is really consistent across the board, and there's nothing that I think sticks out as being particularly bad or problematic or anything within this book. So yeah, it's just a really great time. You're not going to be singing from the rooftops necessarily once you finish this, but it's a really enjoyable read. And also, if you didn't watch some of my previous collection videos, I do also have one other SDEM work, which is a officially translated and published in English doujin that was available at the Toronto Comics Festival that they have every year. And SDEM was a guest quite a while back now, and that was something that was available to buy when she was there as a guest, and you can still buy it. It's still available, and that one's called Carmen, which is about a bullfighter and his lover, and a woman named Carmen who ensnares the hearts of every man in Barcelona. It's really good, tragic though. Very, very much a SDEM story. So I wouldn't say read SDEM if you're wanting just like a cute, slow burn, sweet high school type romance. But if you're wanting something with a little bit moodier, almost always with, or absolutely always with adult characters as well, then check out her work. Next is the 3-volume complete series of Escape Journey by Ogretsu Tanaka. This is a series that I have issues with, but overall I enjoy a lot. I really like Tanaka's style. I really like how she wrote, for the most part, the relationship between these characters and how they interact, and the struggle of bettering yourself for your partner, and reconnecting, or like redating your ex, as it were, and trying to get things right the second time. And there's so much to love about this series. I really love Tanaka's art style. I think Ogretsu Tanaka is a really beloved mangaka for a lot of reasons. She's very accomplished, but I do not love all of her works. I think the upcoming Yarichin Beach Club is something I will never read and do not want to even touch with the 10-foot pole. But there's some other stuff of hers that I really, really want to read, and I really want to have available in English, because her stuff is kind of all over the scale, which is great. So it means there's something for everyone. This one is kind of firmly in the middle. And they're all, like, even if I don't like her works and I dislike some of the stuff that is in them, I do think they're of a very consistent high quality. They're just not books I would be reading. But Escape Journey, my biggest issue with it, and it's only present in volume 1 for such a short time, and I said this when I was doing my pickup videos for this series, that there's a moment of sexual assault, arguably rape, for like a very, very, very brief moment as part of an argument or as a result of an argument that is quickly like cut off, ended, and everyone involved is like very aware of like it's a bad thing. It's not romanticized, it's not glorified, anything like that. I dislike it so much because it's unnecessary for this series that otherwise does such a great job with these characters. And it just hurts me that like I was enjoying it so much until that one moment, and then afterwards I was enjoying it so much, and the whole rest of the series I was enjoying it a whole lot. But I cannot not mention that, because it is almost like it's just so out of place and shocking and unnecessary. I'm like, damn it, why do you have to do this to me? But overall, I really like how she handles in this story the fact that these characters did used to date and things didn't work out, and there was very obvious reasons as to why things didn't work out, and these characters actively trying to fix what made things not work out before. They do actively try to better themselves, and I think there's something really valuable about like second chances and giving a relationship a second try after time has passed. Like it's not a thing where it's like, oh, they broke up and immediately like got back together. This is like, it's been a couple years since they've drifted apart and stopped dating, and they're reconnecting in university, and so they've grown up a little bit, and they're more aware of their feelings, and all of these, like, there's so much good in this series. And if the idea of like sexual assault for a brief moment that is overall like such a small part in this larger story doesn't, if it doesn't, you don't have an issue with it, absolutely, I 100% recommend this book. If that does, if that does worry you, if you dislike that type of thing, then I'm not going to say don't read this book, because as I said, it's such a small part, but I do think it will impact how you view certain things later, or it will impact probably your perception of the character for a while. And it's never really like apologized for necessarily, which is sort of the worst aspect of it, because I kind of like BL, there's always gonna be the risk of, non-consensual sexual assault in BL if you don't know what you're getting into. So that's always a risk you gotta kind of take. But as I said, I think if you're well informed, you can get past that, which is why I do always mention it. But it's good. It's good. Like, I would say it's a good read. It is really good. I'm happy that Sublime has put it out, but I'm just going to put a little asterisk next to my good and my recommendation, because it is one that I think people would be kind of, you don't want to go into it and be like shocked by that, and then that have it color your entire rest of your reading, and dislike it for that. But it is like, there's, as much as I harp on about that particular aspect, it is really good, and I do really like these characters, and I like, again, how the portrayal of trying to rekindle a relationship after it didn't go so well, and also the initial type of friendship, and trying to figure out how their relationship dynamic is going to work now is really good. And I'm happy that I do own it. Like, for as much as I say, like, I focus on the negatives, I do think it's a really good series, and I'm happy it's on my shelves. Next is Jacques by Scarlett Barrico, another Sublime release. This one I really like, but again, there's some problematic elements. This is about two classmates and kind of childhood friends, or at least, like, they've been friends for a couple years. And one has a particular fetish, as it were, for tights, stockings, and so one day, after his friend accidentally ends up wearing a pair of tights after his sister's laundry kind of gets muddled with his own, it flips the switch on his friend, and so they end up in a very sexual relationship, just because of his fascination and his adoration for tights-clad legs. And then there's conflict about growing feelings out of that, and obviously their friendship has progressed to something else, but then there's a conflict of whether this was ever meant to seriously be a relationship, or whether it was this kind of a mutual satisfying of desires, as it were, between friends. And so there's a lot of, I will say up front, it's an explicit manga about teenagers. If that's not something you want to read, then, be aware. Scarlett Barrico does some really sexy, like, erotic, like, her smut is really sexy. I like, if nothing else, man, it is good to read. Let's just put it at that. And that, like, for me, that aspect isn't really an issue. I think that, like, majority of teens are having sex. It's not really a thing that is an issue for me. I mean, it's not. And the other, like, major problem for this, and if you're going into, like, BL manga, I think you should expect there's going to be explicit, or at least BL manga like this, where there's literally an explicit content rating on the front. You should expect to see explicit scenes. But the other major thing is, like, one of the friends, an additional friend who is very out and gay and fabulous, it does have a sexual relationship with an older man, who I'm pretty sure is a teacher. And it's like a butthole man, boy, you need to get someone your own age. Like, I don't know, I don't approve of this message, but he's out there trying to live his best life, and I'm just like, oh, kid, no, you could get such a better boyfriend. You deserve a better boyfriend than some creepy teacher who's willing to sleep with a student. But he is a really great character despite that. Like, he's kind of a voice of reason, and he's definitely not a mentor as such, but he has a lot of experience and advice that he can give to characters, that because obviously he's living an experience that they haven't, and that they're kind of finding themselves in. So it's really good. I also really love the main character's sister. I think she's a great addition to the cast. It's really nice to have manga, BL manga and LGBT manga and yuri manga and all of that does have a supportive family system or friend system, siblings as well. Like I'm all about supportive siblings, and for this particular series we do have that character and his sister as the only ones in the household. I'm pretty sure their parents died, and it's just a dynamic that I really love reading. I think she's super cool, and yeah, Jackass is pretty good. If any of those things that I mentioned are things that you're wary about, then maybe don't read it. But I really like Scarlett Barrico's work. We have the next one is also one of her works, and then we do have some of her other stuff coming out next year by Sublime. Really happy to see more of her stuff being licensed and released. Next is 4th Generation Head Tatsuyuki Oyamato by Scarlett Barrico. This is a single volume release, kind of a sequel to one of her other series that we don't have in English, but it's not really necessary to read that to understand this, which is why I'm sure Sublime put this one out. So this is the story of a young Yakuza member, kind of the heir to a particular group, who, after having his heart broken by his masseuse, who is another man, he kind of stays in bed and stays depressed, and so his family, his father sends him to a branch in another city in order to kind of like just find himself and get himself out of his funk and give him some responsibility. So he's moping around this new city and gets absolutely screaming drunk the first night in order to try and forget his broken heart, and he ends up passing out on a bench, and some stranger helps him, takes him to his place, and through a sequence of events they end up sleeping together. So warning for intoxicated, somewhat dubious consent, sexual stuff there. But it's brought on by this guy's drunkenness and his broken heart, and just wanting to, like, he's thinking of this other man whilst he's sleeping with this other guy. And then the next morning when he wakes up, he's like, what? Like, where am I? Who are you? What happened? He remembers they slept together, but then it is revealed that this stranger is not quite a stranger because they actually met in childhood. And he kind of really helped this other guy out when he was in a really low point in his life, and he's just been in love with him ever since. So it was kind of a miracle to him from his point of view that they were able to reconnect like this, and so he's wanting a relationship, but our Yakuza heir is like, no, I'm not interested. A major part of the story is their relationship, and they're getting closer, and I do really like their dynamic, despite it starting in a somewhat dubious way. I like that. I'm just a sucker for, like, oh, we met in like, just, not that these two are childhood friends, but they have a past, and it makes me soft, and I just like, I don't know, I'm just a sucker for that type of story element. But I will say that, like with a lot of Yakuza BL, Twittering Birds Never Fly is a perfect example of this. There is a lot of sexual content in this book that is not between our main characters. It's not non-consensual, but it's not like, it's not because they necessarily want to sleep together, if that makes sense. It's very transactional. It's definitely being used as blackmail or like payment for this character, because the whole setup is that one of these members of the Yakuza in the new city that this guy is in has unrequited love for this Yakuza heir's father, so the boss, basically. And in order to kind of get back at the boss in not realizing, or just like in order to try and lure him to coming to the city, this other guy uses the son as bait, basically, to try and like get him to come to and I don't know what his plan was. It wasn't very well thought out, but there's definitely like a very dark element to that, so warning. But it's and in that sense, like the sexual stuff, because it's very explicit, is not really satisfying in the way that like a smut is usually between couples who are wanting to sleep together. But regardless, Scarlet Barca's art is still really, like, it's still sexy and it's still really beautiful, but it isn't like it's not one that like I would say, oh yes, this is totally fine, I 100% recommend this to everyone, because I wouldn't. Just be aware of that element when you go into it. It's fairly typical for Yakuza BL. So again, if you're used to this type of setting, I don't think it's anything outside of the ordinary for what you normally expect. But it's if you're not used to it, then fair warning, it has that, and so be prepared. Next is Go For It Nakamura by Juné. This is a single volume, cute, adorable little rom-com, or mainly comedy manga about a closeted gay kid who is very accepting of his sexuality, but he has a big fat crush on one of his classmates whom he's never really even talked to, but he thinks he's just like the best person. He's totally in love with him. And this other kid is sort of the complete opposite of our main character. He's very popular, very friendly, has a lot, like, very large group of friends, whereas our main character, Nakamura, is very shy, quiet, and he kind of looks not scary, but he looks grumpy and kind of gloomy, so a lot of people he doesn't have any friends, really, which is, he's so sweet. So the whole manga is kind of him befriending this other boy, and the various interactions, the various cute, adorable, funny day-to-day things that happen in their interactions through school and through various other means, and then it kind of culminates in their school trip. And then, Nakamura kind of realizing his wanting to befriend this other boy and the state of their relationship it's really good. It's really good. And also finally getting some larger insight to this boy that he's kind of loved from afar for a long time. And, learning more about his personal fears and struggles and vulnerabilities. It's super duper good. I adore it. This is hands down, like, along with Classmates, along with I Hear the Sunspot, this one is a fantastic starting point for BL or LGBT manga. It's very funny. I'm pretty sure it has a sequel, like follow-up volume as well, which is like Keep Going For It Nakamura, or whatever it is, which I hope Seven Seas will license, because I'm pretty sure this one did very, very well, so I wouldn't be surprised. I adore it. Juné has a really adorable retro character art style, as you can tell from this cover, and it's Oh, it's so good. One of the best of its type that has come out in the last year or so. Is it a year old? Did it come out this year or last year? I can't remember. But it is marvelous. And I have a copy. My sister has a copy. It's one that I think most people enjoy. Even if you don't like BL, I think you will like this. It's very, very funny. And also it's really refreshing because Nakamura, as I mentioned, he's quite accepting of his own sexuality. He never has this questioning of like, oh, I'm not gay. I'm a straight guy. I could never be a gay man. Which is quite common in BL, unfortunately. And even there's an element where he thinks that he's attracted to a girl, and his first thing is like, oh, maybe I'm bisexual, not like immediately like, oh, well, maybe I'm actually straight. Like, he never dismisses his interest in boys, which is really nice. It's really nice, guys, and I mean, a breath of fresh air. I really enjoy it, and the next series is another Sunday work, which is on the totally opposite end of the spectrum, insofar as setting and theme and genre, but both of them really good, and I hope we see more from Sunday. So next is Total Eclipse of the Eternal Heart by Sunday. This is a horror BL manga, and emphasis on the horror. It's also, like I say horror, it's kind of a psychological thriller, and there's two storylines that are running in parallel here. So there's the present day and then there's the past. And so our main character, he's a teenage boy. He has a real interest in one of his classmates, and he has these recurring dreams about dying, basically, and being killed by someone who he calls sensei. And so he has these recurring dreams, but he kind of chalks it up to, like, I don't know, just puberty or something. But he goes to school. His friend is there. They're quite good friends. And his friend tells him, this boy that he likes, he says, oh, well, like, you like me, how about you date me, how about, we do whatever, I'm up for it. So he thinks, jackpot. But suddenly, all of a sudden, this boy who is kind of confessed, like, hey, I know that you like me, and I am totally down for that, is attacked by a stranger, another young man, who stabs him, and so this other, this kid that he likes is bleeding out and dying, actively dying. He thinks he's dead, and he goes to get help or something, and when he comes back, the other kid's gone. He's no longer dead, bleeding out after being stabbed in the gut. And the next day at school, he's like, oh, hey. And it's kind of like it never happened. And so there's a recurring thing about this boy who he knows, his classmate, is constantly being the target of attacks, and being murdered. And then we have the past, in which there's a very popular novelist who would befriend his fans, who would generally be young boys, and murder them, as you do. So he was a serial killer, and he killed 9 or 10 young boys before ultimately being caught or dying or whatever it was. So there's an element of, like, the past literally repeating itself. There's a lot of, oh man, there's dark themes galore. Let's just say that. Murder. Literally, like very creepy pedophilia types of things, and bloodlust, literally. just the twisted mind of a serial killer, and it's so good. It's so good. But yeah, I mean, don't go into this one expecting a Go For It Nakamura, because that's not what you're gonna get. This is also, like, this actually does have smutty or like sexual elements to it. Yeah, I mean, the pedophilia plays kind of a larger part in this, so be aware of that. Not only in the past, but in the current day. And so, yeah, it's super duper good. I really appreciate that Juné has like such a broad range of stuff that they can write about and do it so effectively. It's very rare that we get a truly horror style of BL manga, because normally we don't get BL horror anyway, but if it is, it's usually kind of like a supernatural element or something that isn't, like, it's not fully going for it, as it were. This is fully going for it. There is death and twisted psychosis and fate and all. Ooh, it's so good. Yeah. Another one I highly recommend, but be prepared when you go into it, because it's a trip when compared to the other book available from this creator. It is, again, two completely different opposite sides of the spectrum, but both really, really good. And again, really adorable, like really effective, I think, retro style as well. It lends itself to the story very, very well. And I love it! Finally, for the shelf, we have Melting Lover by Bukuro Yamada. This is the first of Kuma Publishing's books that I own. And if you're not aware, Kuma is the LGBT imprint of Faku, who are a hentai publisher. So all of their LGBT work, so their BL and their Yuri as well, so both of them will be released under this title, are explicit have explicit scenes. But I will say that this, and apparently the other of their first BL titles that are coming out, are not like super duper explicit. I wouldn't say this is any, like, I'd say it's tamer compared to like Twittering Birds Never Fly, or like half of the stuff that I've talked about. Or I mean, it's probably tamer than a lot of, Twittering Birds, Gerard and Jacques, Escape Journey. It's probably at the level of like Only Serious About You, if that, or like Return of the Prince, these one-shot collections, because this is also a collection of short stories. A lot of them are, if not all of them, have kind of a sci-fi element to them, and they're kind of weird and out there, and there's a lot of strange stuff going on here, but I really enjoy this book. I think that I'm really happy that Kuma has, or Faku in particular, has diversified to including LGBT manga and explicit LGBT manga. And also the other thing that they do is that they have a very good relationship with their creators, and so for their hentai, and as well as for their books for this imprint, are decensored by the artists themselves if the artist so chooses. So they actually ask the artist to go and draw back in like all the genitals that are otherwise censored in Japanese releases. And they just have a really good reputation. I don't personally own any hentai, but I do really respect Faku as a publisher. I think they're one of the best in the industry, just because of how well they treat their staff, the creators, how the high quality of the books they put out. And this being the first of their books that I've bought is really a testament to all of the good things that I've heard over the years about them. So this, as I said, is a collection of BL short story or single chapter sci-fi stories. Melting Lovers, the first one, and that is an interesting dynamic between a guy with like an obsessive crush on one of his senpai from university, like really obsessive, and then one day this gelatinous blob he finds on his like patio or his veranda or porch or whatever it is, and that blob goes like, it's a weird like alien sentient thing, but it sees all of the crazy stalker photos that this guy has, and it recreates it forms itself in the image of the guy in the photos, so he has kind of his own copy of that guy who lives with him and is like attached to him, but he realizes that it's like pretty messed up that he's actively having a relationship with this guy who he has a actual crush on, like a different, like it's weird, but it's good. There's also one of the later chapters of this book. There's like, it's the future in which humans are no longer the dominant species, and society has been overtaken by androids, and now humans are like pets within android society. And so our main character is an android who has a human pet, and pets are like also really expensive, so not many androids have them. And then like this conflicted feeling of attraction from this android who really shouldn't even necessarily have attraction. I don't know how the AI works, and their self realization and awareness. I don't know how that, but it's been a long time, so maybe it's gotten better. But also like his conflict on being attracted to as pet, which is kind of an interesting thing, because now like humans don't, I don't know whether it's just because I don't know, but they're not nearly to the levels like humanity actually is. These are very pet-like humans. So it's weird, but it's interesting. Like I like BL that can be little bit strange and like really push boundaries on just the bizarre and still be really interesting. There's also one where there's like a hitman and an angel who he like hangs out with. There's a lot, and that one's not even explicit, or at least I don't think it's explicit from what I remember. There's a real mix of stuff in here, and it's really, really good. Really good. Please support Kuma Publishing if you want. They also have, their next book is, I can't remember exactly what the title is. It's something along the lines of Can an Otaku Like Me Be an Idol? It has cross-dressing in it. It has the cross-dressing character is also kind of the very cute, girly-looking one, but he's the top. So there's that. And then it's because like the other guy, both of them are interested in a particular net idol, and then if the guy, I don't know, it's the whole thing. I'm looking forward to whatever. Again, nothing but good things. It is available digitally, and I think physically through the Faku or the Kuma Publishing store. But the shipping to Australia is like way too much, so I'm just going to wait for the wider release like I did with this one. But their upcoming licenses as well are things that I'm really excited for. So, yeah, that'll be great. Support this publisher, support more publishers putting out uncensored LGBT queer erotica, and yeah. On the next shelf we start with my oversized or larger trim size BL. The first one is actually a manhwa. This is a Korean comic put out by Net Comics, which is kind of what they specialize in. And this series is Intense by Kyung-ha Yi. This is a really great series to read, and I definitely recommend it if you're a fan of Twittering Birds Never Fly. The print release is complete in 4 volumes. There's also a digital release for the original quote-unquote release of the kind of doujin-esque type of works, which is 9 separate volumes, but the 4 volumes in print is the entire series. And this is the story of I believe a young guy who works as a hitman for sort of the gangs or the mafia within Korea. And he's sent to the country to kind of lay low for a little while, and there he meets a pretty interesting character who's kind of a jack of all trades, and they actually end up living together whilst this guy is in hiding. And over time they slowly get closer. And it has that, I mean, intense is literally in the title, but it has that kind of darker tone, but that the whole atmospheric intensity that comes with a Yonada work. So I do really think if you like her stuff, then check this one out. The artwork is also really, really beautiful, which is kind of the standard for manhwa. I don't own a lot of manhwa in my collection, not for lack of interest, but most of the titles that we do see getting licensed and released aren't things that I'm particularly interested in, and it is such a niche and small thing within the market that it's hard to kind of find what's best. So really happy that Net Comics did release this. It was, I think, the first of their physical releases that I ever bought, and I'm really happy because the way I ran into this was I saw on there, I think someone else posted a picture of recent releases that they had bought, and this was one of them. It was either that or it was like a promo photo that they had posted on their own Twitter, and the cover just grabbed my attention. And so I bought the first volume and absolutely fell in love, and then immediately bought the other 3 subsequent volumes. I actually repurchased the first volume as well from Net Comics' actual website, because with their first 2 volumes, I believe, you can get them signed by Kyung-ha Yi, which is a really cool extra. I don't know if that's still available. It probably is. Who knows? It's been absolutely years since then. But yeah, this is one that I don't think a lot of people know about, but I would highly recommend it, especially if you are a fan of like Yonada and kind of Yakuza type stories and the like very high tension, intense relationships. It's really, really good. Next is the other Kyung-ha Yi release we have in print. This is Dreams of the Days. And this is a single volume, so it's complete in one. And I wouldn't say this is I wouldn't necessarily recommend this one to start with out of her 2, unless you're more interested in sort of high school relationships. But this is the story of 3 friends who are in high school, and one of the friends starts having kind of erotic dreams over the other friend, and then he's very conflicted and questioning his sexuality, and he's pretty sensitive about it because he's a quite not feminine looking guy, but he's a very pretty boy, and so he doesn't like to think that he's gay necessarily. So there's that element. And then when he finally confesses what's been bothering him to the third friend kind of confesses his own feelings for this guy. And so the whole relationship, again, it's sort of a love triangle, the whole relationship dynamic shifts. And if that's something that interests you, then I would it's still drawn really beautifully. I would still recommend it, but I think because it is one volume and because it is like a love triangle, that it's not going to be for everyone. But I'm happy that they did manage to put out another Kyungha title out in print. And I hope we see more of their stuff, because I know there's one that's digital only, and I can't remember. I have read it. But I can't remember anything about it. So maybe that's not a good testament to it. But I'm sure they have other stuff, and I'd like to read it. I'd be interested in seeing what else they've created. Next is You and Me, Etc. by Hugo. This is a collection of one-shots or short stories put out by Blue. So again, another older Tokyo Pop release. I think this one, it's out of print, but I think this one is fairly easy to get and for very cheap. I actually like this collection quite a bit. It's been a while since I read it, but I think that the stories are fairly consistent. The main story focuses on two, I don't want to say childhood friends, but, well, probably two friends who play baseball together until one of them gets an injury and can't play anymore. And so the complicated conflict over that, because the friend was injured trying to save the other friend. So there's a lot of guilt there. There's also a longer story about like an older guy who is kind of struggling to find any direction and meaning in his life, and then he runs a sort of a boarding house, and a young guy shows up. No, he doesn't. He's living by himself, but like in a very large house, and then a younger guy who is a relative of like one of his college friends or something shows up because his dad sent him there to I guess live there whilst he's going to college. So there's that dynamic. That one has 1 or 2 chapters for it. There's some pretty interesting character writing in this particular volume, and I think it's, for a collection of like short stories, I think it's done pretty well. So yeah, it's worth a read if you can come across a copy, and I think it is fairly easy to come across a copy of this one. Next is an old Juné release. This is New Beginnings by Kotetsuko Yamamoto. I actually really like Yamamoto's work a lot, but I think this is the only of her work we have in print. She does have quite a bit of her stuff available digitally, so support that there. But this also is kind of a self-contained volume. It does have a sequel volume that was never licensed, but this is a story of, again, 2 childhood friends two guys who knew each other in like kindergarten, first grade-ish, like elementary school, when they were really young, and one of them would protect the other from all of the bullies, and it was like very strong and tough and whatever. And then the bullied one moved away several years back, and now they are meeting again for the first time in however many years. But the one who didn't move, the one who was the protector, was under the assumption that the other kid was a girl because he was very feminine looking and cute and was usually dressed like a girl, had pretty long hair. But when he finally reconnects with this other kid, he realizes that he's not a girl, and which kind of bums this other kid out, because he was pretty much in love with the idea of this girl from his childhood, and expected that, their feelings would be mutual and that he'd finally get a girlfriend and everything else. But he finds out pretty quickly that it's not that his feelings aren't technically mutual, but it's a shock to him that it's a guy, as per is kind of the usual for this type of trope. But it's done really well. I really like Yamamoto's, I don't know, humor. She has a good balance to her characters and their character writing. And I do wish that we saw more of her stuff in English. Her long ongoing things are very popular and are very unlicensed. So I do think she's a mangaka that her stuff is generally asked for as well, requested, that's the word I'm looking for, requested for by fans a lot on social media. So I do think there's a market for her stuff, and I do hope we see someday more of her works being released in English. I don't know how readily available or true that will happen, but I do think there's a market there that people are wanting more titles from this mangaka. And this one's a pretty solid, like, single volume series, but it is quite tame. It's kind of a slow burn. There's nothing really explicit about it. So if that's the kind of BL you're looking for, New Beginnings is a pretty solid one. Back to more from my favorite mangaka. This is The Moon and the Sandals by Fumi Yoshinaga. This is a 2-volume set that was released by Juné in its entirety. And oh man, this is a really, really, really strong debut for Yoshinaga. So this was her first ever title that she wrote, or at least had published in Japan. And I have to say, considering some of the debut titles that I've read, it's a little bit of its time, but oh my goodness, it's so good regardless of that. This is the story of two couples and sort of two stories in parallel, but the story starts off with a high school kid who's totally in love with his history teacher, and he basically tells his teacher that. But do not fear, all of you who are iffy, like myself, of student-teacher relationships. He's kind of not immediately shut down, but you find out that the teacher is already in a relationship with another man, but is currently in like the midst of an argument with him, and they've been together for a decade. So for me, I'm like, yeah, long-term couples, established couples, that's what I like to read about. So by the end of the first volume, this kid has kind of been rejected and is nursing his broken heart, and in the midst of that, he meets one of his upperclassmen who is very standoffish. A lot of people don't like him, but he's the older brother of this kid's classmate who he's quite good friends with, and she harbors romantic feelings for him. But quickly, this student and the upperclassman, or his friend's brother, they kind of fall into a romantic relationship despite the upperclassman's total disinterest in not just love in general, but he's like quite homophobic. He really doesn't like to think that he might be gay or that people around him might be gay, which is an interesting dynamic, and it's not done so much in the typical BL, like, oh no, but we're both men. It's more like he's a bratty high school guy who's never even given any thought to himself, and also doesn't care about people at all. So he's just really shitty to pretty much everyone. So he's just kind of a general asshole, and Yoshinaga can write assholes in a really in a really good way. I think she gives them a lot of depth, and they do tend to grow from that point as well. They're realistic assholes, which is good. But I think out of the two couples, I do prefer the adults, which should be no surprise to anyone. But there are some things that I find, as I said, this is kind of its age, 90s BL. There's nothing terribly for 90s BL, like it's really, really good. It doesn't rely so much on a lot of the toxic tropes or any of the toxic tropes. It does have some of the heteronormative, dynamics and things like that. But overall, it's really decent. Plus, and I love it for this, and this is something I also really enjoy from Escape Journey, which, despite its flaws, like this is something it does really, really well. And Yoshinaga's titles in general is its female characters, which is not something you get very much of in BL, because obviously the focus is on the guys, and Jacques as well. Yoshinaga has amazing character writing, and the female, like the friend, the sister character, she is one of the standout characters within this series, and honestly, like, read the story for her. She steals the show. She is phenomenal, and I love her character arc throughout the entirety of the story. It just has such nuance, and her kind of the ending of her story in the second volume is just so perfectly done. I can't not recommend this. So yeah, The Moon and the Sandals is really, really, really good. And if you like Yoshinaga's series, if you like kind of, I guess, sweeter BL, and if you like BL that does have good female cast, then this is worth the read. Next is Don't Say Any More, Darling, which is a collection of one-shots, or a short story collection, like Truly Kindly. And this is for a long time, this is kind of the, I don't know, weirdest. And I actually really love this little volume. There's a lot of variety in this particular book. And of course, like, I'm a huge Yoshinaga fan. It did for a long time have the weirdest kind of chapter story that I had ever read, which is the sex robot one. But now I've read Melting Lover and like other stuff. It's not nearly as shocking, but it does have a story about a sex robot, and it may have a twist that could surprise you. But aside from that, we also have a story about like a musician who's kind of living or kind of living with his friend who and taking advantage of his friend's kindness pretty much, and their whole dynamic. There's a lot of really really good stories in here, but I would say honestly the strongest one, and this is again like a huge shock, I think, in a BL collection, and I think it speaks volumes to Yoshinaga's style and how she likes to write characters, and her actual focus and her priorities when writing stories. Because the best chapter, I would say, is actually about a heterosexual couple, so a straight couple who are older, and a man's conflict with his new wife, and him feeling like she feels unwanted because she might compare herself to his ex-wife or his previous wife, and therefore not think that he loves her. Like, it's so good. It's so good. And like, obviously, you know, straight couples aren't something you read about in BL. Like, that's kind of not the point, but it is honestly the highlight of this book. And all of the stories, again, are really, really good. So that's saying something. And yeah, Yoshinaga manages to pull everything together. And I think even if you're not expecting that, you'll still really, really like it. So Don't Say Anything, or Don't Say Any More, Darling, is a pretty solid single volume. Like with all of these larger Juné releases, especially the Yoshinaga ones, I think it's fairly easy to get, so you're not going to have to break the bank to afford it, and it is really worth reading. But I say that as a huge Yoshinaga fan and kind of a shill for her works, but it's definitely worth reading. Next, and finally for Yoshinaga's titles and my BL, we have Solfège, which is probably my least favorite of her works overall, but in saying that, it's still a really solid work if you're a fan of this genre and this dynamic. So this is the story of a music teacher, a gay music teacher, who, and his relationship with one of his students, who at the start of the story is like a 15-year-old boy, and he has a really beautiful singing voice, opera voice, and so a lot of the story is this teacher's conflict with obviously having a relationship with this teenager, and also his regrets in not being able to follow his own dreams, his own music career, his own and the rejection of male singers, especially like operatic singers or choir singers, once their voices change, which obviously is something that happens at puberty, which is where this other kid kind of is. It's good. It is really well done, and I'm saying that as someone who really dislikes student-teacher relationships in all of her media. I do not like it, but I do think, like with the student-teacher relationship in Flower of Life, which is not a BL title, but it is a Yoshinaga title, I think that there's a nuance, and the way it's portrayed as something that isn't positive, it isn't inherently a good thing, it's not romanticized, does give it a little bit more than just a typical, like, oh yes, it's totally fine for your 15 or 16-year-old kid to be dating someone a decade older than them. It's not. It's a bad thing. But I think student-teacher relationships are quite normalized in fiction, especially romance fiction. So if it's not an issue for you, then I don't think you'll have an issue for this just generally. But it's not a trope that I particularly like. And in saying that, I do think that these characters have a pretty interesting growth over the course of this book. And I won't say that I'm inherently in love with the story, but I do think it does what it's trying to do very, very well. And I do think I was not an operatic singer, but I was a choir singer, and I kind of grew up with a lot of music and singing around in my teen years and also preteen years. So I do get a lot of the conflict that this series has, especially obviously, not my voice didn't change, or what didn't change as drastically as the boys around me. But I witnessed like people, their voices changing over time and them not being able to sing the way they used to be able to sing anymore. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff here that I enjoy despite the tropes. And Yoshinaga, even if I'm not in love with kind of the premise, she tends to convince me by the end of it. So, you know, it's not one that I would readily recommend compared to some of her other stuff, but it is very good if you're if you're not as sensitive as I am to this particular dynamic. Next is one of my favorite and one of the best new BL releases for 2019, kind of just in general, full stop. This is Ten Dance by Inoue Sato, an ongoing BL manga, slow burn romance about two professional ballroom dancers, one who specializes in standard ballroom, so waltz, foxtrot, things like that, and then one who specializes in kind of Latin dancing, samba, those sorts of, and the tango, and, two different styles, but kind of within the same industry, as it were. And the standard ballroom dancer, he and his partner are kind of some of the best in the world. They're currently number 2 and have been number 2 for a long time. And the Latin pair, they are very well known, but only nationally. They don't go into international competitions, and so they haven't really grown past sort of the Japanese dancing or Latin dancing community. So one day, the Latin dancer is I guess confronted by the standard dancer, and he's asked if he wants to kind of team up and practice together in order for both of them to learn the other's dances, so that they can compete in the 10 dance, which is an event where dancers have to dance all 10 different styles in succession. So obviously these two have very different specializations and would understand, standard versus Latin very differently. And so they're hoping that if they're able to, because the standard dancer really wants to be number 1, like he wants to push himself to be the best in the world, which is something that has eluded him for a long time, and there's sort of an implication that there's a lot of prejudice because he and his partner are Japanese, and like the larger dance community is very focused in Europe and in America and things like that. So so he's trying to prove to not only himself but to the community that his dancing is like the best there is. And then the Latin dancer, he's trying to push himself to a level where he and his partner can dance internationally. And oh boy, my guys, this is such a wonderful series. The chemistry between these characters is palpable. And although it is a slow burn, so it's not necessarily like you're not going to get satisfaction nearly as quickly as you would in like a single volume, it is so worth reading. A similar type of BL that came out many a year ago, focused on dance, is The Man of Tango. And that one is like a single volume, and there's a lot of really good stuff in that volume, but I wouldn't say it's my favorite. It does have a lot of tropes that I'm not particularly interested in. But this achieves everything that I think that one was trying to do. You can understand why these dancers are so good at their job, because the tension, the chemistry, the allure is just incredible. And like, I don't know about you guys, but when a slow burn romance finally achieves, the romance part of it, when our couple finally kisses, finally admits their feelings, etc., it's so much more satisfying. Volume 5 has just come out. It is an ongoing series in Japan. And man, this is one of my absolute 100% recommendations from this year. This and Classmates are the newer titles that I'm just like, you have to be reading this. If you like BL, then they are must-read books. Yeah, it's so good. And again, another series with great female characters, which is marvelous and necessary because dancing is a two-partner sport. Next is a newer debut title for 2019. This one was put out by Yen Press. I didn't mention, but Ten Dance is a Kodansha title. And so this and Ten Dance and like Classmates, it's an interesting thing because we're seeing more and more publishers releasing BL as like under their own label. They're not making like a smaller imprint just to focus on BL like Tokyo Pop did with Blue, and Juné is an imprint of DMP. So we're seeing a shift, and obviously Sublime is an imprint of Viz. So we're seeing a shift to more BL coming out, but also coming out under just like the general logo and release of the publisher who licensed it, which is interesting. I think it allows more people to be exposed to it when it's not being segregated to its own little imprint. But anyway, regardless, this is Monster and the Beast by Renji. This is an ongoing series. I believe it started and is ongoing as like a web comic in Japan. And this one, for the longest time, even when I bought the first volume, you can see that, I mean, you might be able to see, there's a volume 1 on here. I just didn't realize that it was ongoing. Like, I knew it was ongoing when I bought it, but then by the time that I received it, I had forgotten. And so when I got it, I was like, oh, this is a 1. And so it's like, oh, I guess it's an ongoing series. But then by the time I was reading it, I forgot. Like, I don't know what was going on with my brain. So I assumed this was a one and done. It's not. It's ongoing. And volume 2 just came out, or is coming out this month. And this is a pretty interesting little series. I will say this and Wizarding Wisdoms by Nagabe, which is another BL title, which I actually haven't shown off in this title or in this video because it is in the larger collection area. But that's I recommend that one as well. But this and Wizarding Wisdoms kind of push into, I'm not gonna say furry territory, but I think it's interesting that we're seeing more non-human types of characters in this genre, and certainly recently. So this is the story of a kind of large monster, forest monster creature who's very scary, who's our beast, or maybe he's our monster, who knows. But he, for as scary and like intimidating as he looks, he's actually just quite a sweetheart and doesn't want to cause anyone any problems. But one day he comes across a group of people in the forest, and he realizes that one of them is being attacked by the other group of people, or like the rest of the group of people, and so he saves his life, and he offers to travel to the town with this guy who he saved. But this guy is kind of like, he's thankful that he was saved, but oh my goodness, he was like, oh, you're ruining our fun. He is very into physical relationships. Let's just put it that way. He is very, he's a free lover. He just, he's a bit of a beast insofar as physical pleasure, if that makes sense. So it's interesting because obviously our more human character is kind of the more intimidating and dangerous one, as it were. And over the course of this first volume, they travel together and grow a little bit closer. And for our monster, it's the first person he's ever like had an extended interaction with, and he grows quite attached, and he's very sweet. And so when ultimately they do reach the town, they decide to stay together. And so you see this interesting dynamic between a literal, like, monstrous creature and this very dapper older gentleman who's, you know, in bed with somebody every night, multiple times a night, just living his best life. And so it's a contrast between, like, his you know, very open sexuality and experiences, and then obviously our monster's more naive and innocent and sweet demeanor. It works very well. And yeah, I think this is just another symptom and indication of how much people are more accepting and more open about their, like, monster kinks. About, like, yeah, I would have sex with a monstrous creature. This is just an extension of that. And it's done very well. I am actually looking forward to the second volume a lot, although I have not received my copy yet. I think the artist is still working on it as well, so it is ongoing, but decent little series. And if you like, or if you don't mind, if you're not put off, or if you're really into, like, monster human relationships, this isn't particularly explicit as of currently. I don't know how that'll change. Who knows? But if you're into it, check this one out. I don't think you'll be disappointed. Next is a newer Tokyopop release. This is Star Collector, and technically this is not a manga per se. It's not an OEL because it's not an original English language manga, but it's an original German language manga. And this is by Anna B. and Sophie Schonhammer. Apologies if I mispronounce that. German names are the bane of my existence. But this is the story of two, I guess, high school kids and who kind of run into each other at night. One of them's a bad boy. He's out there smoking and just kind of being a bit of a, you know, bad boy, as it were. Being a bit of a truant. And then he runs into a kind of quiet, nerdy kid, sort of newish to the school, who is out stargazing. He's got a telescope, and they sort of bond over their nightly meetups, and they start a relationship, and thus they have a lot of interesting, you know, just high school romance types of things. I really like this particular book. I mean, okay, so when Tokyopop announced that they were coming back, I was very hesitant. I don't like to... The thing is, like, I don't want to support Stu Levy, who's the CEO and, like, the head owner of Tokyopop, because he burnt a lot of bridges and he screwed over a lot of people and a lot of fans when he kind of withdrew Tokyopop from the market way back in the day, probably a decade ago now. So I don't like supporting him, but at the same time, I don't want to be a hypocrite when something that I'm interested in is licensed by them, and it's gonna... In seeing their releases for 2020, there are a couple things that I'm, like, really interested in. They're releasing Aria as well, which is really beautiful masterpiece collection releases. So it's a conflict. It's a conflict that, you know, I think everyone has to assess for themselves. But this is one of their titles that is, like, an original work from one of their creators from their German branch, which is, like, kind of a separate thing from the US side. But this is one of their creations and titles, and it has had pretty good ratings, and, like, it just really interested me to read. I really like the stargazing aspect of it, really into that. And I also was really curious to see, like, the Western interpretation of a BL story like this, and I think it's done really, really well. This is also, if you're not aware, written in and drawn, I guess, in the BL, like the Japanese style, so it's read right to left, and it follows like a proper quote-unquote manga. It honestly, I think you could give this to someone and then not even notice the difference. I think the biggest thing is the perception of high school compared to the Japanese perception of it, and sort of the responsibilities of teenagers and how teens interact. And I think because obviously our writer and our artist are Western, are German, they do have a different type of experience and a different way of showing that. And I think that for a lot of Western people, or a lot of people just in general outside of Japan, I think it's a little bit more of a genuine and relatable experience compared to a lot of like Japanese high school settings. But it's really, really good. I think it handles a lot of its aspects of reconnecting with family and homophobia and all of these things really well. Another series with a really great female character, and I really like the platonic friendship between the female character and our main character. I think there's a lot to really enjoy about this. One of the huge themes of the book is communication, and it took a little while for me to pick up the second volume, not because I didn't want it, but because I think it was quietly released. Because I pre-ordered it and then the release date changed, and then I think my order was cancelled because it was way later, and then I just didn't get it. I don't know. But it is available in its entirety from Tokyopop now in English, and I would recommend it. As much as I hate to say, like, go buy new Tokyopop manga, I am gonna say it if it's something that I like. And because I'm not a hypocrite, I want to support these creators and these books, and I think this is a solid little story. I look forward to reading more from these two creators as well, if we ever see it in English. Next is Future Lovers by Saika Kuneida. This is a super duper old book, released by Do. 2-volume series, and this is an older one, but I do recommend it. I think it is kind of hard to hunt down the volumes though. I'm not sure because, man, this is an old release. So this is the story of a guy who breaks up with his girlfriend, and it kind of comes as a shock to him because he thinks that he's set. He's quite, let's say, old-fashioned in his beliefs and like, people's roles in marriage and that type of thing. So his girlfriend at the time is like, hell no, like, ew, I'm breaking up with you. You're a weirdo. And so and it's not through any, like, obvious prejudice. He doesn't think that, like, necessarily that women shouldn't work or whatever, but he is kind of like, oh, but when we get married, you'll, be a housewife and you look after the kids. And it's like, what? I don't even want kids. Who said I want to quit work? So he doesn't communicate with his partner very well, and so obviously he's left brokenhearted, and he's trying to drown his sorrows at the bar, and he runs into a very handsome man, and they end up sleeping together, basically. Things happen, they end up sleeping together, and it's like a really odd awakening for this guy. He is obviously doesn't regard himself as gay, never really considered it, but now it's like, oh, like, this happened. And for some reason, he's kind of very into this guy, and never realized that, he might not be completely 100% straight. And so he he kind of chalks up the whole interaction. When he wakes up, they kind of go their separate ways, and it chalks it up to like, oh well, that was an experience, but now I need to find another girlfriend, which is one way to handle that situation. But he quickly finds out that at his new job, which he's a high school teacher, he's actually this beautiful man that he slept with is one of his coworkers, is one of the fellow teachers. And so they now have to work together after this whole thing. And so there's, like, from there, they have to kind of figure out their relationship. And obviously our main character has to do some personal searching and examination of his sexuality. It's done really well. I think the later volume has a really good portrayal of, introducing your partner as a gay person to your parents and thinking about the future and the realities of, like, because gay marriage is still not an option in Japan, but the realities of how gay couples do try to have a legal connection. It's really, really well done, and it's very good. I would recommend it, but as I said, I do think it's kind of hard to hunt down, and it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. I think it's definitely a little of its age, but I do think it has a lot more going for it and a lot of nuance that gives dimension to these characters and to their situation. It's just overall a pretty decent and really strong story that just gets better over the course of the 2 volumes. And yeah, it handles a lot of the realities and the specificities of, like, being a gay couple in Japan who want to be committed to each other in a society that doesn't, especially at that time, didn't have a legal option for these two to be recognized as partners, or as a couple. It's good. It's really good. And obviously the struggles of acceptance and family and things like that. So yeah, I do recommend it. Next we have another Net Comics release, another manhwa release. This is Prince Bari by Solanin and Maki. So this is, I really like this story. It's kind of very up my alley. But this is the story of a spiritualist. He's not a real spiritualist, but he's kind of a con man. He takes advantage of the internet and social media and that stuff to pretend to be, able to read the future and to read the fates and whatever else. And when in actuality he can only see one ghost who he has seen his entire life, and he kind of relies on that ghost, who is in the form of a very young boy, to tell him any information or anything that he isn't able to dig up through social media. So it gives a little bit of credibility to his situation, but he's just a con man. So he helps people with, whatever, their future, love readings, curses, whatever. And one day, one of his clients is the head of a, like, big software company, and he is also being haunted, but just recently, by another ghost, like a other ghost, which our main character can see. And he's kind of surprised because he's never come across another ghost aside from the one who he's lived with his whole life. And so he's both shocked, and then he's trying to figure out how to, detach this ghost from this CEO. But he isn't really able to do that because he doesn't know how, but two, that his ghost friend doesn't know how either. And the ghost is like, he's made the decision that he doesn't want to leave, or he can't leave until, he's achieved what he needs to do, which is a bit esoteric, and, they don't really know what that is, and he doesn't know what that is. So the four of them, two ghosts, two adult men, end up living together in an effort to, I don't know, well, there's obviously like an attraction there, but the idea is, the excuse is that if they spend more time together, then our spiritualist will understand the situation better, and then he'll have a better idea on how to fix it. It's pretty good. I enjoy it. I like the larger plot and the mystery of like who these ghosts are, because you do later kind of realize that the ghosts kind of know each other, even if they don't inherently realize that at first. So there's it's interesting dynamic, and over time, our businessman and our con man kind of grow closer as well. Very domestic setup, and I'm all for domesticity in my romance manga, and BL is no exception to that. We have 2 volumes in English. It's ongoing. I don't know when we'll see the 3rd one, because Net Comics isn't really like the most open about their release schedule, so who knows when we'll see volume 3, but it is very, very good. And if you like BL that's kind of domestic, has a sort of supernatural feel, I think, then check this one out. And it is, it might be pretty obvious, but it is a manhwa, so it reads left to right, so like a quote-unquote normal way for a Westerner to read it. And the art's really good, as per usual. Check it out. Next is Apple and Honey, and the follow-up, Apple and Honey, His Rose-Colored Life, by Hideyoshiko. This is a story of a gay couple, well, a gay man, and his relationship with his partner, and the ups and downs of that. But I really liked how we get a look into our main character's insecurities with himself and his sexuality, his struggles being open about being gay, because one of the largest themes for this particular book books is that our gay one of the characters, and sort of I'm not going to say normal gay, because I would say that one of the characters is bisexual and then the other character is gay. Our gay character has always struggled with fully accepting himself. He perceives himself as being, broken or wrong, and he's felt a lot of rejection over his life, not only from people around him, but himself, in not being able to be quote-unquote normal. And so he has a lot of insecurities when he's in a relationship, especially on being sort of public and open to the world about his sexuality and about being in a relationship with a man. And I think there's a lot of complex emotions to that Hideyoshiko does a really good job at portraying. There's I think it's in the 2nd volume, kind of a flashback from the character of him remembering the first time he saw a gay couple, and how no one else seemed to realize that they were a gay couple aside from him, and how they were so quietly in their own little bubble that the rest of the world didn't seem to matter. And it was the first time that he recognized that men could be together. It's really, really done well. I think there's a lot of really good stuff to this series, but this, again, Juné release, impossible to find in print. I think maybe one of the volumes is available in print, but the other one is very out of print. So maybe another one to read digitally if you are wanting to read it versus, hunting down a print copy and then having to pay hundreds of dollars for it because it's ridiculous. But yeah, I think Hideyoshiko, we currently have another manga licensed by them. I can't remember if it's, I want to say it's on Futakiya, the new BL subscription service, which is wonderful as well. I 100% recommend that service. It is so good. But I can't quite remember. There's another Hideyoshika book out there, series out there, something that I've read recently, and I can't remember what. It was either Futakiya or it might have been something that was licensed, maybe digital only. I don't know. Who knows? I can't think of it right this moment, so I guess we'll have to wait to find out. But Apple and Honey is a solid little character piece, and interesting to see the dynamics of these characters and to see how their relationship changes and adjusts in reaction to and for our main character and his personal insecurities with himself and his life. It's really, really, really good. Finally, for the shelf, we have Blue Morning, Volume 1 to 7. The 8th volume is the last one. I do actually have Volume 8 as well, so I have the complete series. But this is a wonderful historical fiction about, I think it's set in the Taisho period, so sort of the slow modernization of Japan and this transitionary period from like the samurai class and all of these class and wealth divides to a more general society, a more even class system. So we have the young master of the house, the head of the family, who has, after the death of his father and after the death of his parents, has kind of been single-handedly raised by the butler of his family, who we later find out was originally set to be the heir to the family before our main character's birth. So he was being trained to kind of take over the household and the family name and everything else. But after our main character's birth, that didn't happen. So it's an age gap romance. It's also, kind of it's quite a large age gap as well. It's probably 10, 12 years. And it is this dynamic where one of the characters has been kind of at the service of the other character. Like it's a dynamic that if it wasn't Shoko Hidaka who was writing it, and if I didn't enjoy a lot of the larger stuff, a lot of because the thing is, like with the other major historical fiction romance that I have in my BL collection, that being Gerard and Jacques, so much of the story is through the actual plot and the politics and everything going on societally that kind of, I'm not going to say that the romance is secondary, but I think you can read it for other aspects outside of the romance, even if you're not like a fan of this dynamic, like I generally am not, because I don't really like age gaps, I don't like power imbalances, but I think because the age gap and the power dynamic, like imbalances, they kind of cross each other out, because the younger one is the one in the higher position of power, and the older one, like, I don't know, I'm not going to try and justify it to people who aren't into that, but I'm a sucker for historical fiction, and if nothing else, Shoko Hidaka does a great job at writing characters, and just I don't know, it just really appeals to me on a lot of levels. So we have this, it starts off pretty interestingly in that our butler character has, like, we have our main, young lord or whatever, who is really interested in the butler and always has been. He's kind of romantically attached himself to the butler and sees him as his partner and wants to be with him forever. As you do. But the larger, and it kind of parallels Lovers in the Night in that way, because that's a very similar sort of setup. But little does our main character know, but he kind of knows, but at the same time he doesn't want to think that that's the case, is that the butler actually really resents him, because obviously his place was lost immediately at the birth of this other guy, and so he lost all the potential and everything that he was working towards and everything he had hopes for, as soon as this other guy was born. And since then he's been like relegated to butler. So he's there's a larger scheme initially for him to kind of not oust the head of the family, but to kind of become the head of the family as he originally was supposed to be. And so he's trying to, gain power over the whole situation and over the family and their companies. And unbeknownst to him, the young master would be totally fine having him take over as, in charge as the head of the family. It's a really interesting dynamic, and these are dense books. Like, oh my goodness. There is a lot of like political discussion, class discussion, obviously discussion on the transition of Japan from the more like samurai and lower class system that they had to a more general or Western idea of gentry and upper class and lower class, and how over time that class divide shrank a lot. The idea of in this transitioning world that, samurai families or the upper class aren't necessary anymore, and therefore aren't worth, it's not worth it to spend your time wanting to, it's not worth holding on to the past and the idea of being a young master or whatever, and because within their lifetime that whole system is going to be gone. It's really good, really interesting, definitely worth the read. And this is, I think, aside from a one shot or two, this is the only of Hidaka's manga we have in its entirety in English, which is a shame, because there is one put out by Juné, which does the flower blossom, but that is, again, Juné. I'm not gonna beleaguer the point, but I'm happy that this was being put out by Sublime versus Juné. Let's just put it that way. But really, really good, especially if you like historical fiction, if you like, master servant or whatever, or master butler relationships, and if you like sort of a darker scheming tone, a lot of political talk, a lot of very, like, the historical setting is very, very relevant for this story, and I think for me that's definitely a plus when it comes to the series, because I like the setting and the time period to be more than just, window dressing. On this final shelf, we only have two series. The first one being Border by Kazuma Kodaka. This is an ongoing series in Japan, I believe. It does have 6 volumes out in Japan. at least. But again, another Juné release where it's just kind of not being released at all because they suck. And this is one I really want to see the rest of. I really, really want to read this because I really like Koraka. I like how she writes her characters and the relationship dynamics, and I like a lot of her stuff, but a lot of her finished series I don't like just the premise of. I like the idea of, like, I like one of the couples of Kizuna, which is the established couple, and I don't like how that couple starts off somewhat non-consensually, but it does, that's only the first interaction, and I mean, what a way to start a relationship, am I right? But for 90 or 80s almost BL, that's not unheard of. Plus, they kind of directly address that by the end of it, so I do think that grows, but I don't like the second couple in that one at all, really. And it is fairly tropey. And also, bad teacher's equation, student-teacher relationship, I'm not into. I think there's so much potential for her series, but I'm not a fan of the age gaps, of the student-teacher relationships, of all these different things. They're just not my thing. But Border doesn't have those things, and which sucks for me because I really like this series, and well, it sucks that we don't have it coming out on a semi-consistent basis because it is by far my favorite of this creator's work, and we just don't have it in English. And I love her art style, for one. I love how masculine she draws her characters. So in this story, the main focus is about a group of guys who are kind of, they're kind of an investigation team who go and help people's problems. They are hired by people and they sort things out. So we have our leader. We have a guy who's kind of very good at computers and surveillance, and they've all got, there's 4 different guys and they all have their roles. And over the course of the series, and we also have one of the characters, he's definitely a ladies' man and whatever else, but he's totally in love with the main character, but is swiftly rejected pretty quickly. But it's a story about found family and all of these guys so we have a new character who comes into the group, and he meets all of these other individuals, and he learns the relationship that they have with the leader of their group, and you soon find out that they all came from, or they all grew up in the same orphanage, and so it's a found family story, which, oh my gosh, guys, I love. If you want my weakness, there it is. But then we also have our main character who has come back to Japan after years away. He was in the military service and was, doing different things, trying to find himself. And he fell in love with one of his fellow officers, and that officer, who was actually the captain or the head of his team in that, so it was kind of a secret relationship. They were never able to be open about their relationship, but unfortunately, the love of his life, pretty much, was killed in action during a hostage situation, and so he, that obviously really affects him. He goes kind of MIA for a long time. He quits what he's doing, and he really doesn't have much hope in life until he comes back and sees all of these kids in the orphanage again. And so it's a story about him finding purpose and reconnecting with people who care about him after losing the most important person in his life. It's so good. It's so good. And I just wish that we had some kind of indication that Juné might be interested in continuing to release this series, because, as I said, I'm fairly certain it's still ongoing in Japan, but we're not up to date. We haven't been up to date for years, and Juné just refuses to put out anything in print unless it's a re-release, or a reprint, I should say. It just sucks. It really sucks. That's something I really enjoy a lot. This isn't tropey either. There's so much to enjoy from this series. That something like this, like with all of the really good Juné manga that I've been talking about, is just not available. It's just not available anymore. And I wish it was. I really wish it was. Juné, I don't know what has to happen, but I would really prefer if someone else licensed these things and released them, or you actually cleaned up your act and started putting things out. I know that they have issues with print runs and just employees. They don't have a huge group working on things. They don't have full-time employees for 90% of their stuff. It just... oh, they need a big restructuring, because this is not how you run a company. And, yeah, that's my 2 cents on the matter. But Border is really, really good. I don't know if you can get all of the books. I'm fairly certain you can. The rest of Kodaka's works are available to read and buy. I'm pretty sure they get reprinted a lot because it's her. She's popular. And as much as I ultimately don't like her other stuff, I have read it all, and it was like it was a 6.5 out of 10. It's not like the worst thing I've ever read. And it's mainly the actual tropes that are used that I'm just like, The quality of the storytelling is solid. Especially for the respective ages of the series. But this one I want, and I wish I could support it, in an official capacity in English. So, maybe someday. It's a pipe dream, but maybe someday. And finally is my guiltiest guilty pleasure. This is The World's Greatest First Love, The Case of Ritsu Onodera by Shungiku Nakamura. If you've been here a while, if you've watched my videos for a long time, you know that I don't really like Nakamura's work at all. It kind of is emblematic of the worst tropes of like the 90s to early 2000s, what was yaoi and what was BL and what people still to this day perceive as that genre. And like, Hybrid Child is fine, but it's like, in my opinion, it's kind of creepy, and I just don't like it very much. Yeah, the Junjo Romantica is... I like the one couple. What is it? Egoist? They're the university professor and the doctor. They're the only ones I care about in that whole frickin'... I haven't read the manga, so I can't attest to the quality of the manga, but the anime I've watched all 3 seasons of it, or 2, how many seasons of it there is. I just don't like age gaps is my big thing. Like, I do not like age gaps, and or like major age gaps, especially when one of the characters is still a minor. It just is weird and creepy, and So, like, the main couple in that, obviously the romantica pair, they have a 10-year age difference, which is also, like, okay, I know people are like, but it changes, they develop. I don't, the fact that the relationship started kind of as a rebound relationship for the older guy, who was in love with the younger guy's brother, is just like, it's just all sorts of yikes, right? Like, you know, I'm just not really a fan of them and their whole thing. I'm not gonna say that they don't develop and things don't change, and you know, the relationship doesn't evolve past that point, because it does, but I just don't like it. And then I really, really, really hate the terrorist, the Junko terrorist couple. I just, for one, a 34-year-old should never be dating a 17-year-old. Ever. Full stop. I don't care what the excuse is. It's just fucking gross. Okay? I don't find any of the comedy for that particular couple funny. I don't like the idea of, like, it's the younger guy's fault that he's, like, barging in on the life of this full-ass grown adult and just, like, forcing himself into that situation, because I'm sorry, but no way. Whatever that his, because I don't remember any of their names, so, except for Usami. But forgive me, the younger guy, the 17-year-old, he has his Australian friend from when he studied in Australia, Ben, or whatever. I know his name. And Ben's like, this is gross and weird. Are you okay? Like, you should not be dating this guy, or you shouldn't be, like, hanging around this guy. And he was totally right. And when I was first introduced to Junko Romantica, it wasn't really in a serious way. It was done, kind of just incidentally. And my friend, who kind of was the one who mentioned it to me, the terrorist couple was her favorite, mainly because she really thought that, like, the fact that this 17-year-old, like, forced himself into this other guy's life was really funny, and, like, his failure at cooking and all of that was really funny. And at the time, I was just like, it's not even funny, though. Like, it's not even funny. It's weird, and I don't like it. It's my least favorite. I actively hate that. And to this day, I don't know. I don't want to be, like, bitchy and judgy, but, like, oh, that's not the reason I would be reading that series. But anyway, my Junko Romantica rant aside, The World's Greatest First Love is set in the same universe as Junko Romantica. And we even get reference to some of the characters. But there's just something about this one where a lot of the issues that I have with Junko Romantica, there's still plenty there. Like, it's still very tropey. It's still, like, oh yes, you have the top, like the strict top, and then you have the bottom, and, like, there's always, like, oh, I say no, but in my heart I mean yes, and I just can't admit my feeling. Like, there's a lot of pretty problematic tropes of BL and just the demographic in general that I'm pretty wary of. But damn it if I'm not gonna be weak to, like, like with Escape Journey, like, the whole premise is that our main character, Ritsu Onodera, he confessed his love to an upperclassman in middle school? Yeah, it would have been middle school. Or high school, early high school. And, they were together for a little while, and ultimately he was deeply in love, but due to a misunderstanding, they broke up, and Ritsu had his heart broken, And since then, he's kind of never wanted to fall in love ever again. And so he's stayed single and just is trying to focus on work. He really loves publishing and books, and his family owns a publishing company. But a lot of his co-workers kind of accuse him and gossip about him, using his family connections to get the best jobs. And so they don't think that he's deserving of his work, and that he's taking advantage and using his position as the son of the CEO, of the owner, as a way to further his career, which pisses him off because he really loves books and he works his ass off. So he decides to quit his family's company, and then he decides to go work at a rival publishing company. And he wants to be in the literature department like he was in his family's company, but they don't have a space for him there, so they send him to the manga department, and more specifically the shoujo manga department. And so he is the newest editor for Emerald magazine, which is like one of the major shoujo manga publishers in the country. And his new boss is like a recent addition to the group. He's only been there 3 years, but in that time he's completely rejuvenated, and the whole magazine made it super profitable. It just total success story. Ritsu isn't very enthusiastic about his new position, but he's like, well, if I can struggle through this, then I can, prove myself, and hopefully maybe someday I can transfer to literature. So when he goes to meet the team, he pretty immediately realizes that the boy who broke his heart 10 years before, his first love, is actually his new boss. And his boss doesn't realize, so he's like, I'm not going to say anything, like, what are the chances? Yikes. Oh my god, no thank you. So he's kind of internally panicking, but he soon realizes that that his boss doesn't immediately realize that it's him. And for two, like, it's been a decade, so he feels like, well, we're both adults now, and yeah, he broke my heart, but I'm not going to let that stop me from being, working hard and doing my job and whatever else. And he realizes that his boss is a really good editor and, like, totally deserving of the praise that he gets. So after a little while of working together, his boss recognizes him, realizes that this was the boy that he dated 10 years ago. And he wants to rekindle their relationship, because the thing that made them break up was a total misunderstanding on both of their parts. And since then, he's been, like, incredibly depressed. He sort of realized that Ritsu was his first and only love, and he's been pining after him forever. And he really the whole breakup really messed him up as well for a really long time. So he's wanting to, reconnect and rekindle their relationship, as it were. And Ritsu is just, like, totally against this. He's like, no way, I'm not giving you a second chance. Even though now he does realize that it was a total mistake and misunderstanding on why they broke up in the first place. But it's got problematic tropes. It's got issues that are pretty standard again, like Nakamura's other works. But one, it doesn't have the age gaps, which is, thank you. But two, I don't know. I mean, maybe this is hypocritical, but I do think that this is a better, from the get-go, I do think it's a better told story, and I think that the relationship dynamic between these two, whilst not, like, fabulous, I, again, like with Escape Journey, I think I like it when couples, you know, you can get back together after it has been an extended period of time and try to make things work and how that relationship changes. I think there's a lot of really good things in this. It's pretty funny. If nothing else, Nakamura's humor. I think in general, I like her humor and how she like chibifies characters for reaction shots and things like that. And I don't have a problem with it in this series, how it's handled. I do think it's quite funny. And I don't know. It's a big weakness of mine. This is not a series that really needs much of an introduction. I think most people know of it and know of Nakamura's works. It's not one that I readily recommend because it's problematic. There's a lot of stuff that is like, oh my goodness, this is very, you know, this is what it is. But it's just a big guilty pleasure for me. It's just, you know, when I see that countdown of days until Ritsu admits that he's in love, I'm just like, oh, I want it to, like, this is the ultimate of slow burns, which, like, it's so dumb because they're actively sleeping together, like, on a regular basis, but Rich is like, no, I can't say that I'm in love with you. I also liked, again, there's like pretty solid female characters in here. I like Kisa and Yukina are the best characters, and I'm saying this, they have the largest age gap, and I love their relationship the most. They are by far the best out of the three couples in this story. Chiaki and whatever the other guy's name is. That's an okay pairing, but I'm not like in love with it. And lucky for me, it's mainly a novel focused pair, so the manga we don't really see them ever. But Kisa and Yukina, I really love them. It's really done well, and I'm whenever it's a chapter about them, I get really happy. Like, oh my god, yes! Oh my god, yes! And I don't mind Ritsu and Takano. I think, you know, it's pretty like mid 2000s BL dynamic, but I don't know. I think Ritsu's pretty spunky, and I think there's a lot to enjoy about how their interactions go. Plus, I really like the female character in this, Ritsu's fiance, or betrothed, as it were. I think she's pretty cool, and she lends the character a bit more depth outside of his burning hatred for love and romance. And it's nice to have characters who are friends with people outside of the immediate characters. I don't know. Sure, she acts as kind of a plot device for drama on occasions, but I don't know. That's not her fault. I think she's a pretty decent character. But yeah, the world's greatest first love. This is probably, I mean, Junjo Romantica is more well established, but I think out of the two of Nakamura's longer series, this is the better one. It's kind of interesting because obviously we have the entirety of the Junjo Romantica series, and on the anime, we've had it for a long time, and it's one of the popular BL titles that died when Tokyo Pop / Blue died, and it's not one that's likely to ever get re-licensed just because of the length and the age, which I do feel bad for the fans. Like, that sucks. But I am really happy that after several years, we have seen a license for this. from Sublime. And we do now also have the two seasons of the anime. We don't have the film on disc, and there's an upcoming film, I'm pretty sure, as well. So like it's interesting to see how in the West how these two series have been treated. Not to say that the anime series of either this or Junjo Romantica are fabulous. They're very cheaply made teen shows. But like compared to how the manga is being handled and I guess the experience of the two, what fans have to rely on to be able to kind of enjoy either of these things. I don't know. It's an interesting thing. And this is kind of a weird place to end this BL collection, because this is kind of the epitome of a lot of things that I dislike, generally, tropes I dislike within this genre. But despite its faults, I still enjoy it for what it is. And I think that's kind of how you have to handle being a BL fan, because there's so much BL available, and quite a lot of it, especially stuff that is older, has a lot of problematic tropes. It has, very obvious sexual assault, age gaps and power imbalances. Even stuff that's currently coming out that's very popular still has fairly dubious consent or dubious ways that characters interact, which is, it's a well-established trope of the genre. But I think overall, as a general rule, we have seen more and more diversity within BL being licensed, and it is easier for people who are a bit more wary of certain tropes and who are a bit more selective, like I tend to be, to find stuff to enjoy. We no longer live in a market as fans where we have to buy everything that's coming out because in order to support it, in order to show our interest, because there is so much. It is really well established. There are so many fans. And compared to 10, 15 years ago, there's stuff that is very obviously higher quality than other stuff. And I'm always of the belief that like fans should always, like, I'm always happy when things are being licensed, even if I'm not the intended target audience, because I do think that fans deserve to support the series that they love. So whenever something gets licensed that I'm not super keen on, then I'm just like, that just means better for me. I don't have to spend the money for it. And that goes the same with Yuri as well. Both BL and Yuri have greatly grown in interest and also acceptance from publishers. So we are seeing more and more titles being licensed, released, announced. And this coming year, there's some really interesting things coming out too. Most notably is Cherry Magic from Square Enix, which is like this weirdest premise, but I've heard nothing but good things about that series. There's other stuff too, but it's not coming to mind. Oh, Canis, I mentioned earlier, coming from Kuma. There's another Scarlet Barrico work coming out in print from Sublime. There's a couple Sublime titles that are pretty cool. It's just really interesting, and I think in the coming years we'll see more and more change, and I hope that we will continue to see a lot of really cool things for this particular genre and some of the more niche genres like this one. And yeah, enjoy your BL. Hopefully some of these titles sound interesting. I hope some people try them. I know that like I don't always have the most popular opinion when it comes to certain titles, but I think I try to make it clear that, you know, this is all my opinion and my personal collection. So as a collector, and as, you know, it is ultimately for me. Like, I'm not buying books for anyone else aside from my own enjoyment. That if you don't see your favorite series, or if I was, you know, critical of your favorite series, that it's not a reflection on you. It's more so that for my tastes, it's just not something I enjoy reading. And I hope I give you and hope for all the power to you to keep enjoying what you enjoy, because there's space within the BL community for everyone to enjoy whatever they want. So, you know, I think there can be a happy medium where all fans can converse and talk about the various types of BL that are being released nowadays. And I hope that, you know, more and more of really great titles of all sorts continue to be licensed.